Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Blue. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry used Wandless magic to make the Dursleys' furniture attack them whenever they tried to lock him up? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The armchair decides. The drive back from King's Cross had been silent in the way that only the Dursley family could manufacture, a specific, pressurized silence, like the inside of a sealed jar. Vernon's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Petunia sat rigid in the passenger seat, her neck so stiff it might have been carved from the same material as the headrest. Dudley was in the back beside Harry, taking up 2/3 of the seat through a combination of natural bulk and deliberate spread, his elbow finding Harry's ribs every time they turned a corner. Harry watched Surrey slide past the window and didn't say a word. He'd learned, over 11 years, that words cost him things. Words got his meals taken away, got him sent to the cupboard, got Dudley's gang pointed in his direction like a weapon with legs. At Hogwarts, words had been different. He'd said things and people had listened, actually listened, and sometimes laughed in the way that meant they liked him rather than the way that meant they were deciding where to aim. But Hogwarts was behind him now, shrinking with every mile, and Privet Drive was coming up fast. So he watched Surrey and kept his mouth shut and thought about nothing in particular. That lasted until Vernon pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and turned around in his seat. "Right," he said. His face had gone through several colors during the drive and had settled on a deep, authoritative red. "Let's get something understood." Harry looked at him. "What happened last year?" Vernon pointed one thick finger. "That business. The school. All of it. That is over. You are back in this house, under this roof, and there will be none of that." He searched for a word and clearly found all of them unsatisfactory. None of that nonsense. No letters, no owls, no funny business with the post. No funny business with anything, Petunia added from the front, still looking straight ahead. "You'll do your chores. You'll stay out of the way. And if I hear so much as a whisper from any of the neighbors about anything peculiar," Vernon left the threat open-ended, which was its own kind of threat. Harry said, "Okay." Vernon blinked. He'd clearly been prepared for argument. The easy agreement seemed to confuse him more than resistance would have. "Right," he said again, less certainly. "Good. See that you remember it." They got out of the car. Dudley shouldered past Harry at the front door. Petunia went straight to the kitchen without looking at him. Vernon carried in 2 suitcases, both his, and left Harry's school trunk sitting in the boot of the car. Harry stood on the front step for a moment, looking at the house. Number 4, Privet Drive. Identical to every other house on the street, which was, he'd come to understand, entirely the point. The lawn was trimmed to a militaristic precision. The flower beds were color-coordinated. The net curtains in the front window were so clean they looked like they'd never been breathed near. He went and got his own trunk. The first 2 days were almost manageable. Almost, because Vernon's version of manageable still involved a list of chores that would have made a Victorian workhouse warden raise an eyebrow, and because Dudley had developed a new habit of walking through whatever room Harry occupied and appending things, a glass of water here, a carefully organized school book there, with an expression of complete innocence. But nobody locked him in anything, nobody screamed at him over breakfast, and Petunia limited herself to pointed sighs rather than active hostility, which counted as a significant improvement. Hedwig was the problem. Vernon had decided, on the second morning, that Hedwig was not to be allowed out of her cage except when Harry was explicitly permitted to send a letter, and that he would determine when that was. This was delivered at breakfast as though it were a reasonable house policy, like not wearing shoes on the carpet. Hedwig had spent most of those 2 days making her feelings on the subject very clearly known. She screamed at odd hours. She rattled her cage with her talons. She fixed Vernon with an amber stare of such naked contempt that he'd taken to sitting with his back to her during meals. "Can't you shut that creature up?" he snapped, on the second evening, newspaper clenched in both hands. "She needs to fly," Harry said. "She's a barn owl, she's not meant to be in a cage." Everything in this house is meant to be where I put it. Harry looked at him for a moment. She's not a thing. Vernon's eyes narrowed. Don't you take that tone. I'm not taking a tone, I'm making a factual point about owl biology. Petunia made a sharp sound from somewhere near the kitchen. Dudley looked up from the television with a slightly startled expression, like he'd expected Harry to fold and was recalibrating. You'll keep that bird quiet, Vernon said, or I'll find a way to keep her quiet myself. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Not literally, not yet, but the air changed in some subtle way that everyone felt without being able to explain it. Harry's hands, resting on the arm of the small wooden chair they'd allocated him while the rest of the family claimed the full upholstered furniture, went very still. You won't, Harry said. The words came out calm. Certain. Not angry, not pleading. Just factual, like the owl biology. Vernon turned very red. I beg your par, I'll keep her quiet, Harry said, standing up. I'll take her upstairs. But you won't touch her. He picked up Hedwig's cage, both hands around the base, and walked out of the sitting room. Behind him, he heard Vernon make a sound that was somewhere between outrage and bafflement, and Petunia murmuring something low and urgent, and Dudley changing the channel with slightly more force than necessary. In his room, Dudley's second bedroom, granted to him grudgingly the previous year, he set Hedwig's cage on the desk, unlatched it, and let her step out onto his arm. She pressed her head against his cheek. He stood there for a minute just letting her do it. I know, he said. She hooted softly. Me too. The third day was when everything changed. It started with the garden. Vernon had a list. The list was written in Vernon's cramped, aggressive handwriting, and it had been sitting on the kitchen table since Harry came home, a document of cheerful tyranny: weed the flower beds, mow the lawn, trim the hedge, repaint the garden fence, clean out the shed, repot the begonias. Harry had been working through it at a pace that satisfied nobody, too slow for Vernon, too fast for his own feelings about the begonias, and on the third morning he was out back at 7 in the morning, crouched in the flower bed, pulling up weeds in a thin drizzle. It was the kind of work that emptied your head. Just the resistance of roots in wet soil, the smell of crushed green things, the damp soaking through his jeans. He didn't mind it, actually. He'd done worse. He was working his way along the back wall when Dudley appeared at the back door, still in his pajamas, eating a piece of toast the size of a small country. Dad says you missed a bit, Dudley said, gesturing vaguely with his toast. Harry looked at the section he'd just finished. I didn't. He says you did. Dudley. Harry sat back on his heels and looked at his cousin. What bit? Dudley squinted at the flower bed. I dunno. He just said to tell you. Right. Harry went back to weeding. There was a pause. Dudley ate his toast. He didn't go away, which was slightly unusual. Dudley generally didn't linger in Harry's vicinity unless he was planning something. How'd you do it? Dudley said eventually. Harry looked up. Do what? The magic. Dudley said it like it tasted strange. Like, what does it feel like? This was so unexpected that Harry actually sat back and stared at his cousin for a moment. Dudley was looking at the flower bed rather than at Harry, cheeks slightly pink, the toast hanging from one hand like he'd forgotten about it. Why do you want to know? Harry said. I don't, Dudley said quickly. Dad was just asking. About the, you know. Whether you could do it without the, he waved the toast at nothing, apparently indicating a wand. Harry felt something cold move through his chest. Why is your dad asking about that? Dudley's ears went red. He shoved the rest of the toast in his mouth, said something that might have been dunno, and went back inside. Harry stayed crouched in the flower bed for a moment, hands in the dirt, watching the back door swing shut. Then he went inside and found Vernon on the phone. He was in the sitting room, standing with his back to the door, voice low and deliberate in the way he used for business calls, each word chosen and placed. Harry stood in the hallway and caught fragments through the half-open door. Certain limitations, can't do it without, no real threat if we, and then, very clearly, keep him busy enough, keep him tired enough, and there's nothing he can do about it. Harry pushed the sitting room door open. Vernon spun around. The phone call ended very suddenly. "That's private," Vernon said. "Who were you talking to?" Harry said. "None of your business. Don't come into rooms without knock. Who were you talking to about me?" Vernon set the phone down. He drew himself up to his full height, which was considerably greater than Harry's, and took 3 steps toward him in the way he'd been doing since Harry was small, using his size as punctuation, as argument, as reminder of how this worked. "I've about had it," Vernon said, "with your tone. With your questions. With the magic," Harry said. Vernon stopped. "You were asking someone about whether I could do wandless magic," Harry said. "Whether I could, what? Defend myself without a wand? You wanted to know if you were safe." The room was absolutely quiet. Outside, a lawnmower started up 3 gardens down. "You are going to go upstairs," Vernon said, very quietly, "and you are going to stay there. And I am going to put a bolt on that door, and you are going to." "You're not going to put a bolt on my door," Harry said. "I'll do whatever I like in my own." "Try it," Harry said. "I'd genuinely like to see what happens." He didn't shout it. He didn't threaten. He just said it, the same way he'd told Vernon he wasn't going to touch Hedwig, like a statement of observable reality. He didn't entirely know what had come over him in the last 3 days, why the usual compression of being in this house wasn't working the same way it always had. It felt like something had shifted on the train home from King's Cross, or maybe before that, maybe at some point in the last year of being somewhere he was actually wanted, and now he simply couldn't locate the part of himself that used to automatically shrink. Vernon's face had gone through red and arrived somewhere in the purple range. "You, listen here, boy, my name is Harry," Harry said, and went upstairs. He heard them doing it that evening. He was sitting on his bed reading 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, not because it was particularly gripping, but because it was something, and the alternatives were staring at the ceiling or going downstairs and watching Vernon's face do color experiments, when he heard the sound. A sort of clunking, shifting sound, coming from the hallway. Then footsteps. Then Vernon's voice, a low satisfied grunt, and the sound of metal scraping against wood. Harry put down his book. He crossed to his bedroom door and turned the handle. It didn't move. He turned it again, harder. The door shifted slightly in its frame but held firm. A bolt. He'd actually done it, they'd actually installed a bolt on the outside of his door. Harry stood there with his hand on the doorknob. He could hear them downstairs now, the television, Dudley's laugh at something, the normal sounds of a family evening. Like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't just locked an 11-year-old child in his room. Something happened in his chest. Not anger, exactly, though there was anger somewhere in there. It was more fundamental than anger. It was the feeling of a line being crossed so clearly, so stupidly, that the universe itself might object. Harry let go of the doorknob. He sat back down on the bed, put his hands flat on his knees, and breathed. He thought about the snake at the zoo, the glass vanishing. He thought about the time he'd ended up on the school roof when Dudley's gang was chasing him. He thought about the way his hair had grown back overnight after Petunia cut it, and how his teacher's wig had turned blue, and all the small impossible things that had been happening his whole life, little pressure releases, steam from a kettle. He thought about the fact that he'd spent a year at Hogwarts learning that magic wasn't random. It had structure, it had intent, it responded to will. He'd just never tried to will it before. Not consciously. He looked at the door. "Open," he said. Nothing happened. He breathed. He didn't panic. He thought about what it felt like when magic worked, that warmth that moved up through the arm, through the chest, that sense of the world leaning in to cooperate. He tried to find that feeling without a wand to direct it, tried to trace it back to its source, somewhere under the sternum, somewhere central. He looked at the door. He didn't say anything this time. He just thought, open. There was a pause of about 4 seconds. Then something metallic went snick on the other side of the door, and the door swung smoothly inward. Harry looked at it for a long moment. "Ha," he said. He stood up. He walked to the doorway and looked out into the empty hallway. The bolt on the door was a cheap one, newly installed, the screws not even fully seated yet. He could see the slightly raised metal plate, a hardware store purchase clearly made that afternoon. It was flipped open, horizontal, released. He hadn't touched it. He walked back into his room, sat on the bed again, and thought about this for a while. Then he thought about what Vernon had said on the phone. Keep him tired enough, keep him busy enough. He thought about being 12 years old, which he would be in July, and about the fact that he was going to spend an entire summer in this house with people who had just bolted his bedroom door. He looked at the door again. Thought, close. The door swung shut. Thought, lock. The bolt snicked back into place. Harry smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile. It was the smile of someone doing arithmetic and arriving at a satisfying answer. He let them unbolted in the morning. That felt important. Let Vernon come up, find the bolt thrown, look confused, draw his own uncertain conclusions. Harry came downstairs for breakfast like nothing had happened, ate his single allotted piece of toast, and washed his own plate. Vernon watched him through breakfast with the look of a man who'd expected to find a problem solved and instead found it reclassified. "Sleep well?" Harry asked, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. Vernon's jaw worked. "Fine," he said. "Good," said Harry. "I did too." He took his juice to the table and sat down. After a moment, he said, "I'll do the hedge today, if that's still on the list." The normalcy of it seemed to pain Vernon more than any confrontation would have. He opened his newspaper with a violent snap and didn't say anything. Petunia, standing at the counter, had turned very slightly to look at Harry. Her expression was difficult to read. She'd always had a careful face, Petunia, controlled, practiced, emotion kept well back behind the cheekbones. But there was something in the look she gave him that morning, something almost reluctant, that he couldn't quite categorize. He finished his juice and went to do the hedge. The armchair happened that evening. It was, in retrospect, almost funny, the specific, stupid provocation of it. Vernon had come home from work in a terrible mood, which was normal, and had made some comment at dinner about the hedge not being level, which was not only wrong but demonstrably wrong, and Harry had said so, mildly, with the hedge clippers still technically within reach as evidence, and Vernon had stood up from the dinner table and pointed and said, the words specifically were, "You go to your room right now or I swear to God you'll what?" Harry said. Complete silence. Petunia's fork stopped moving. Dudley actually looked up from his plate. "What will you do, Vernon?" Harry said. Vernon's face went red to purple in record time. He grabbed Harry by the arm, not hurting him, exactly, more of a clamp, the way you'd grab someone before marching them somewhere, and steered him out of the dining room and down the hall toward the sitting room, apparently intending to do something that was going to culminate in Harry being put somewhere and a door being shut. They made it as far as the sitting room threshold. Vernon walked through the doorway. Harry followed, pulled along by the arm. And then the armchair moved. Not fell over. Not slid. Moved. The large overstuffed armchair that lived in the corner of the sitting room by the window, Vernon's armchair, the one nobody else was permitted to sit in, the one that had a small side table for his evening whiskey and a permanent indent from years of Vernon occupying it, that armchair turned. Rotated, smooth as something on rails, 90 degrees, and positioned itself directly in Vernon's path. Vernon walked into it. The impact wasn't dramatic, it wasn't as though the armchair had lunged at him. He simply walked into it at a speed that wasn't compatible with an obstacle being there, stumbled, grabbed the armchair's back for balance, and stood there blinking with the expression of a man whose understanding of how furniture worked had just been revised. Harry looked at the armchair. The armchair was still. Harry looked at Vernon. Vernon looked at the armchair. Then at Harry. Then back at the armchair. "What," Vernon said carefully, "did you do?" "Nothing," Harry said, which was both true and completely untrue. He hadn't done anything, consciously. But the magic had been coiling under his skin all day, the bolt last night, the breakfast this morning, the accumulating pressure of being grabbed in his own, in the Dursleys, in the house, and something had apparently decided to weigh in. Vernon let go of Harry's arm. He took one very careful step around the armchair, maintaining eye contact with it, and stood in the middle of the sitting room with his hands slightly raised at his sides, the posture of a man not making any sudden moves. "Petunia," he called. "I'm here," Petunia said. She'd followed them into the hallway and was standing just outside the sitting room door, looking at the armchair with an expression that Harry could only describe as deeply unsurprised. "The chair, I see the chair, Vernon. I know what it did." A beat of silence. Vernon looked at Harry. "Go upstairs," Vernon said. His voice was completely different, flat, careful, like he was diffusing something. "Are you going to bolt the door?" Harry asked. Another silence. "Go upstairs," Vernon repeated. Harry looked at the armchair for a moment. It sat in the middle of the room, angled toward Vernon, doing nothing, looking entirely ordinary. He'd have thought he'd imagined it except for the fact that it was 6 feet from where it was supposed to be and Vernon was still maintaining a slight distance from it the way you maintain distance from a dog you're not sure about. He went upstairs. He sat on his bed and pressed his hands flat on his thighs and thought about what had just happened, and the thought was less what was that and more right, then. Because here was the thing. He was 12. He had no wand, well, he had his wand, but he wasn't allowed to use it, and using it would send an official ministry owl before he could blink, and then there'd be a hearing, and he'd lose it, and he'd be here with nothing. He had no way of contacting anyone for the next 3 months except through letters that Vernon could intercept. He had a bedroom, a locked cage for his owl, a homework list that the Dursleys would do everything in their power to prevent him from completing, and no plan. But apparently, he also had an armchair. He leaned back on his bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about that. The magic had always been there, he understood now, not as something he generated but as something he was, something that moved with him and breathed when he breathed and responded to things the way emotions did. The wand was a channel for it, a way to aim and shape it, but the magic didn't require the wand any more than a river required a particular bank. It would find its edges. Last night, he'd found he could think it open, think something clear and intended and have the world answer. This evening, he'd felt it move before he consciously directed it at all, because it had been primed, pressurized, ready, and Vernon grabbing his arm had been the final increment. So the question wasn't what was that. The question was, what did he want to do with it? He thought about this for a long time. He heard Vernon and Petunia talking downstairs, the low urgent register of a serious discussion. He heard the television go on, probably Dudley filling the gap in events with cartoons. He heard the house settle around him, the familiar sounds of 4 people and 1 owl occupying a space with insufficient goodwill to go around. He wasn't going to hurt anyone. That felt important to be clear on, even alone in his room. He wasn't going to weaponize this, wasn't going to hex the dinner, wasn't going to do anything that would make things genuinely dangerous. But he wasn't going to be locked in rooms either. He wasn't going to have his mail held, or his owl held, or his homework hidden. He wasn't going to be grabbed. The magic apparently agreed with all of this. "Right," he said to the ceiling. "Then we've got a summer to get through." He came down for breakfast the next morning and the armchair was back in its corner. Vernon was already at the table, dressed for work, tie on, reading the newspaper with ostentatious normality. He didn't look at Harry when Harry came in. He turned a page with great deliberateness. Petunia poured Harry a glass of juice without being asked. Harry sat down. Dudley came down last, looked at Harry, looked at his father, looked at the sitting room doorway where the armchair was visible through the open door, and sat down in his usual seat with slightly more caution than usual. Nobody said anything for almost a full minute. Then Vernon set down his newspaper. He looked at the table. He said, to the table, "I've been thinking." "About?" Harry said. "About Vernon gestured. "The arrangement. For the summer." "The bolt," Harry said helpfully. Vernon's jaw tightened. "That's been removed." "I know. I heard you take it off at 6 this morning." Another pause. "There's no need," Vernon said, still to the table, "for any further incidents. If things proceed calmly and sensibly. If everyone in this house respects the rules. The normal way of things." Harry looked at him. "What do you mean by the normal way of things?" Vernon finally made eye contact. It cost him something visible. "I mean that you do your chores, you're civil at meals, you don't bring any of that business into this house, and what do I get?" Harry said. Complete silence. "I'm sorry," Vernon said. "What do I get?" Harry repeated. "Because last time we talked about the arrangement, what I got was a lock on my door, my owl in a cage, someone going through my post, and a list of outdoor chores in the rain. So I'm wondering what the revised arrangement looks like from my end." Vernon stared at him. Petunia had turned to look at Harry from the counter. Dudley was doing something with his toast that required tremendous concentration. "You get," Vernon said, through what appeared to be his entire remaining store of self-control, "a roof over your head, which is more than what?" Harry said. The question sat in the kitchen like something heavy. Vernon didn't finish the sentence. Harry hadn't expected him to. It was the sentence that ended "than your kind deserve" or "than I owe you" or "than you'd get if the choice were mine," and the fact that Vernon was at least self-aware enough not to say any of those things out loud suggested that last night had recalibrated things somewhat. "Hedwig has access to the window," Harry said. "Every night, or she gets very loud and I genuinely can't control her. That's not a threat, that's just barn owl behavior. My homework doesn't disappear. My post goes both ways, sent and received. I do the chores on the list and I don't make trouble." He stopped. "Let it sit." "And?" Vernon said, because he could apparently sense the end coming. "And nobody grabs me," Harry said. "That's the whole list." The kitchen was very quiet. Vernon looked at Harry. Harry looked back, holding the gaze steady, not aggressively, just clearly, the way you'd hold a door open, present and certain and not moving. Vernon looked away first. "Fine," he said. The word came out like he'd had to extract it with pliers. "Great," said Harry, and helped himself to a second piece of toast. Dudley, across the table, made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly converted to a cough. Petunia turned back to the counter. Vernon opened his newspaper again, very carefully, and the morning continued. 3 days later, Harry was in his room working through his Transfiguration holiday reading when Hedwig came back through the window with a letter. He recognized Ron's handwriting before she'd fully landed, a cramped, cheerful scrawl with a blot where the quill had been pressed too hard. "Harry. Mum says we can come get you if it gets bad. Are the Muggles being awful? Fred and George want to know if you've done anything brilliant with wandless magic yet because apparently word got around, no idea how. Write back loads, I'm dying of boredom and Ginny keeps reorganizing my room." Ron. Harry read it twice, smiling. He thought about writing "the armchair moved on its own and now my uncle answers questions at breakfast." He thought about the specific quality of Vernon's face that morning when Harry had asked and the way the sitting room had seemed to breathe slightly, as though something in the walls was paying attention. He picked up his quill and wrote, "Ron. Tell Fred and George word got around correctly. Tell your mum I'm fine for now. More soon." Harry. He tied it to Hedwig's leg. She gave him a look that communicated several things, the primary one being and I'm working on it, he told her. She flew out the window into the evening, and Harry watched her go, then turned back to his Transfiguration reading. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its standard summer evening routine, lawnmowers, children, distant music. Everything entirely normal. In the sitting room below, the armchair sat in its corner and was patient and still. Harry had just gotten into bed that night when he heard something from downstairs that he couldn't immediately identify, a sort of rhythmic thudding, irregular, like something being moved. He got up and opened his door and listened. Vernon's voice, low and somewhat strained, and a second voice Harry didn't recognize, male, older. They were in the sitting room and they were talking in that same careful, under-volume way that meant Vernon didn't want to be overheard. Harry stood at the top of the stairs. He breathed slowly and pushed, gently, with the magic, not at anything physical, just outward, like widening something, trying to hear better, and the sound clarified slightly. Doesn't matter what we agreed, there have to be precautions, Vernon, mate, I'm telling you, without the stick, they can't actually, the chair moved, Brian, a pause. Chairs don't just, I'm telling you what I saw. Harry leaned against the wall and listened to Vernon trying to convince someone named Brian about the chair. Brian sounded skeptical. Brian sounded like a man who wanted to believe in a completely ordinary world and was being tested. The conversation didn't resolve anything, but it told Harry something useful. Vernon was frightened enough to reach out to people, and the people he was reaching out to didn't believe him. Which meant Vernon was isolated with this in a way Harry hadn't appreciated. Harry went back to bed and felt, for the first time since leaving King's Cross, something like okay. Not happy, exactly. This wasn't Hogwarts. But he wasn't locked in anything, and his owl could fly, and the armchair was downstairs being quietly ominous, and tomorrow he had Transfiguration reading to finish and a letter from Ron on his desk, and he was 12 years old and there were 3 months until September 1st and he was, very precisely, going to be fine. He closed his eyes. Somewhere downstairs, Brian was still trying to reason with Vernon about chair physics. Harry smiled and went to sleep. Chapter 2, The Dining Table Has Opinions. The letter from Hermione arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry knew because Vernon had a specific Tuesday morning ritual, newspaper, coffee, a review of the week's schedule written on the kitchen whiteboard in his blocky handwriting, and Harry had come to use Vernon's rituals as a calendar. Hedwig dropped the letter onto his Transfiguration reading with the casual accuracy of an airmail service that charged extra for attitude, then hopped sideways along the desk and fixed him with an expectant look. "There's owl treats in the drawer," Harry told her, not looking up from the envelope. She found them herself. Hermione's handwriting was the polar opposite of Ron's, each letter formed with the careful precision of someone who decided at age 6 that handwriting was a skill worth mastering and had never revisited this possibly excessive commitment. "Dear Harry, I hope the summer is going adequately. I've been reading ahead in Defense Against the Dark Arts and there are some genuinely fascinating sections on nonverbal casting. Apparently the principle is that magic responds to intention as much as incantation, which I imagine you already know more about practically than most people do theoretically at this point. I've also been reading Hogwarts, a history again, I know, and there's a section on accidental magic in young witches and wizards that I think you'd find interesting, specifically the part about emotional amplification and how it changes after a child's first wand contact. Apparently the magic becomes more responsive, not less, once channeled properly for the first time. How are the Dursleys? I mean this in the clinical sense. Are they being awful? Ron wrote to me with some vague hints that seemed to suggest things were happening. Write back soon. I'm in the middle of rereading Magical Theory and it would be nice to have a distraction. Hermione. Harry read the letter twice. The bit about nonverbal casting and emotional amplification sat in the back of his mind like a puzzle piece looking for its slot. He'd been thinking about the armchair all week, thinking about the bolt on the door, and the way the magic had responded each time less like a desperate accident and more like a considered choice. He'd been practicing, quietly, in his room, small things, nothing dramatic. Moving his quill across the desk. Turning pages without touching them. Twice, successfully, levitating his transfiguration book a few inches off the desk and holding it there, and the second time it had been easy, genuinely easy, the way a stretch becomes easy when you've done it enough. The magic was learning what he wanted. Or he was learning how to want things in the right direction. He wrote back to Hermione, "The Dursleys are being the Dursleys. The armchair is being useful. I'll explain when I see you. Send me the bit from Magical Theory about intention-based casting if you get a chance. I think I've been accidentally doing it." He wrote back to Ron, who'd sent a second letter consisting almost entirely of questions. "Still fine. Better than fine, actually. Tell Fred and George if they want the full story they'll have to wait until September." Yes, really. He sent both letters out with Hedwig before breakfast and came downstairs to find Vernon standing in the kitchen doorway watching him with the expression he'd settled into over the past week, a careful, assessing look, like a man who decided the best approach to a situation he didn't understand was sustained observation. "Morning," Harry said. "Morning," Vernon said, moving out of the doorway. This was what the new arrangement looked like, Harry had found, a kind of watchful, armed neutrality. Vernon still occupied the house like he owned it, which he did, and he still made pronouncements at dinner and criticized the hedge and expected the chores done on schedule, but he'd stopped making the specific mistakes that seemed to trigger responses. He didn't grab, he didn't bolt, and he'd stopped the business with the post. In exchange, the sitting room furniture stayed where it was supposed to be, and Harry did the chores and ate his meals and existed in the house with the quiet self-possession of someone who knew, at every moment, exactly where the exits were. Petunia was the more interesting case. She'd been watching Harry with that same difficult-to-read expression she'd had at breakfast the day after the armchair, the look that wasn't quite surprised, wasn't quite resigned, but sat somewhere between the two. Twice he'd come into the kitchen and found her reading something quickly put away, and once he'd caught her standing very still in the hallway outside his door, not doing anything, just standing there with her arms crossed and her eyes on the floor, and she'd looked up and seen him and said, "Lunch is ready," and gone back downstairs before he could say anything. The third week of summer, she left a book on his desk while he was in the garden. He found it when he came up to change, a thin paperback, library returned, the spine worn. It was called The Practical Witch's Companion to Everyday Spellwork, which was not the sort of book Vernon would have permitted in the house, and which Petunia had therefore obtained, hidden, and deliberately placed in Harry's room. He picked it up and turned it over. There was a library stamp on the inside cover from a branch in Cokeworth, which was where Petunia had grown up. Where Lily had grown up. The book was 20 years old. He sat on the edge of his bed and held it for a minute. He thought about Petunia as a teenager, watching her sister do things. He thought about how that might feel, the sister who could, the sister who couldn't, and then the choice to leave all of it behind and marry Vernon Dursley and live in this house on this street with this lawn. He thought she might have been watching Harry all week not out of suspicion but out of something older and stranger than that. Recognition, maybe. Or grief. He put the book on his desk and didn't bring it up at dinner. She didn't either. Mrs. Figg came on a Thursday. She came, as she always came, through the back garden, over the fence with an agility that was mildly surprising for a woman of her age and apparent general infirmity, wearing a cardigan with a cat on it that might have been ironic or might have been completely sincere, carrying a tin that smelled unmistakably of cabbage. Harry was weeding the back flower bed again. He looked up when he heard her land. "Mrs. Figg," he said. "Harry, dear." She brushed off her cardigan with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been climbing fences for years and had no intention of discussing it. "You look different. I've been outside a lot." "That's not what I mean." She looked at him steadily. Arabella Figg's eyes were, Harry had always thought, more alert than her general presentation suggested, sharper, more focused, not old lady at all. She set her tin on the garden wall and put her hands in her cardigan pockets. "I've been watching the house." "I know," Harry said. A pause. Something shifted slightly in her expression. "Do you? You're the neighbor who always seems to be in her front garden when I leave the house," Harry said. And you take your bins out at odd times and always happen to be facing this direction. And last week when Vernon had his friend Brian over, you were doing something with your roses at 10 o'clock at night. He went back to the weeding. You're watching the house. Mrs. Fig made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You're sharper than you were last year. Last year I wasn't paying attention, Harry said. She came and sat on the garden wall, settled herself onto it with the ease of someone who'd sat on this particular wall many times. The Dumbledore arrangement, she said carefully, is that you're safe here. That the situation with your mother. The protection it creates. That's real. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore told me. He told you a version of it, Mrs. Fig said. Harry stopped weeding. He looked up at her. She met his look directly. He told you that you need to be here, that the blood protection is centered on this house, that you're safe from Voldemort while you're here. All of that is true. She paused. He didn't mention the part where keeping you here was always going to require some compromise. Compromise, Harry said. The Dursleys' behavior. She said it flatly, without apology. Dumbledore knew what sort of people they were. He made a judgment that the protection you needed outweighed other considerations. He's been getting reports on your welfare since you arrived here as a baby. Reports, Harry said, and the word came out with more edge than he'd intended. From me, Mrs. Fig said. She didn't flinch from it. I've been sending reports to Dumbledore for 10 years. Harry sat back on his heels in the wet soil and looked at her. She was watching him steadily, the tin of cabbage smelling something on the wall beside her, the cardigan cat staring blankly at nothing. What did you tell him? Harry said. The truth, she said. That you were undersized and doing too many chores and that they treated you like furniture. I told him every time. He thanked me for the report and said the situation was manageable. The garden was very quiet. A pigeon somewhere in the hedge made a sound like a malfunction. Manageable, Harry said. His word. Harry looked at his hands in the soil. He thought about 10 years of reports. 10 years of manageable. He thought about all the years in the cupboard under the stairs, all the Christmases, all the times he'd gone to bed hungry because Dudley had eaten everything and the Dursleys hadn't bothered to make sure there was enough. Why are you telling me this now? He said. Mrs. Fig was quiet for a moment. Because something changed when you came back this summer. I can feel it. I'm a squib, I have no magic, but I've lived near magical things my whole life and I can feel the difference when the air around a place changes. She looked at the house. The house is different. You're different. Harry didn't say anything. He's going to find out, she said. Dumbledore. He'll sense it or someone will tell him, or he'll check his monitoring charms on you and notice something. And when he does, he'll come here, and he'll have a plan, and the plan will require things from you. I thought you should know all the parts of the picture before that happens. Harry stood up, brushed the soil off his hands. He looked at Mrs. Fig on the wall. Thank you, he said. She looked slightly surprised, as though she'd expected anger. I'm sorry, she said. For the reports. For all that time. You were trying to help, Harry said. In the way you were told to. That's not the same as choosing not to help. She picked up her tin. Started back for the fence, then stopped and turned around. The magic, she said. The Wandless. It's not normal, Harry. Even for a witch or wizard, it's not normal at this level, at this age, with this kind of control. I don't think Dumbledore fully appreciates what he's sitting on. Good, said Harry, simply. Mrs. Fig climbed back over the fence and went home. The dinner table incident happened the following Saturday. Vernon had invited a colleague home for dinner. This was something he did occasionally, a display of domesticity as status, the sort of dinner where Petunia's cooking was on exhibition and the house was presented as evidence of Vernon Dursley's general worthiness as a human being. Harry had been expressly briefed, He was to eat his meal, say nothing interesting, and preferably be close to invisible. The colleague was a man named Davies, clearly named after the drill company in the way of people who'd worked somewhere so long that the company had absorbed their surname, who was large, loud, and enthusiastic about drills in a way that made Vernon seem almost restrained on the subject. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a laugh that could have stripped paint. Harry sat at the end of the table and ate his dinner and was invisible. This was not difficult. Davies had no interest in children and Vernon had no interest in acknowledging Harry's existence to colleagues, so they talked about drills and golf and something about a contract in Swindon, and Dudley ate 3 portions of everything, and Petunia refilled glasses and smiled the practiced smile she wore for company. It was all going fine until dessert. "So this is the nephew, is it?" Davies said, noticing Harry with the air of someone who'd suddenly spotted a piece of furniture he didn't remember ordering. "That's right," Vernon said. "Harry. He's visiting for the summer." Visiting, Harry thought. He said nothing. "What school do you go to, son?" "St. Brutus's," Vernon said, before Harry could open his mouth. "Very good institution. Excellent for discipline." Harry looked at Vernon. Vernon looked back with the flat warning expression. "Right," said Davies. "Good school. It has a very strict curriculum," Vernon said. Harry said, pleasantly, "I go to a school in Scotland, actually." Vernon's eye twitched. "Scotland?" Davies looked interested. "Boarding school?" "Yes. I've been there a year. I like it quite a lot. Some of the other students are brilliant. My friend Hermione reads everything twice and my friend Ron can play chess better than anyone I've ever seen." He paused. "The lessons are unusual but I think that's what makes them good." "What sort of lessons?" Davies said. Vernon's hand tightened on his wine glass. "The usual things," Harry said. "History, astronomy, we do a lot of astronomy actually, there's a class that goes up to the top of the tower at night, astronomy," Davies said. He seemed to find this eccentric and delightful. "At a boarding school?" "Well. It's a very good school," Harry agreed, eating his pudding. Vernon was giving him the look that in previous summers would have been followed by consequences. Harry met the look with complete serenity, which seemed to confuse Vernon more than defiance would have. Under the table, Harry could feel the magic sitting warm and attentive beneath his skin, not doing anything, just present, the way a friend might stand just within earshot when you were in an uncomfortable situation. Davies moved on to other topics. The dinner continued. Harry ate his pudding and watched Vernon's face slowly return from its alarmed color to its normal resting displeased color, and thought, that was fine. The evening might have ended there if Davies, at the door with his coat, hadn't said with jovial goodwill, the goodwill of a man who'd had most of a bottle of wine and was feeling generous with the world, "Fine family, Vernon. Fine family. That boy's a credit to you." Vernon made a sound. "Must be proud," Davies said. Said Vernon. "Takes after his father. Or his mother's side." Vernon said, "His parents were, they're not," he stopped. Started again. "His parents died in a car crash. He lives with us out of necessity." Out of necessity. Harry heard it from the kitchen, where he'd gone to bring the dessert plates. He stood at the counter and held a stack of plates and heard the words and let them sit for a moment, let the feeling they produced settle. Not hurt. Not anymore, not really, the Dursleys had been saying worse his whole life and the wound had calloused over. What he felt was more like a specific clarity. Out of necessity. No mention of Lily. No mention of James. Just an inconvenient structural fact, a boy who existed because he had to. He put the plates in the sink. Behind him, he heard the dining table shift. It was a small movement, the table didn't lunge or spin, nothing dramatic. It shifted, the way a large piece of furniture shifts when someone heavy sits down on the end, a slight adjustment of weight and position, a creak of floorboards. But nobody had sat down on the end of the table. The table had done it itself. Harry turned around and looked at the table. The table looked back, if tables could be said to look at anything. Grunnings Davies left a minute later, cheerfully unaware of anything. Vernon shut the door and came back into the dining room, and stopped when he saw the table. It moved, Petunia said. She was standing in the dining room doorway, arms crossed, looking at the table with an expression that was now entirely decipherable, resigned. "I know it moved," Vernon said. "I didn't do it," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, arms at his sides, completely calm. "I was in the kitchen," he said. "You can check the plates." "That doesn't mean you didn't," Vernon started. "Out of necessity," Harry said. Silence. Vernon blinked. "What?" "That's what you told him," Harry said. "Your colleague." "That I'm here out of necessity." I mean, it's true, technically. I just thought it was a funny thing to say about a person." Vernon opened his mouth. The table moved again. This time more definitively, it walked, that was the only word for it, all four legs shifting in short deliberate movements across the floor, and rotated 45 degrees so that instead of being positioned neatly in the center of the dining room, it was angled toward Vernon with one corner pointed at him like an accusation. Vernon stepped back. "Harry," Petunia said. "I'm not doing it," Harry said. "I genuinely think it does it when it decides to." "Furniture doesn't decide things," Vernon said, slightly hysterically. "The armchair disagreed," Harry said. That was different, was it?" Vernon pointed at the table. He pointed at it the way you'd point at a misbehaving pet. He opened and closed his mouth several times. The table stayed at its new angle, patient and committed, one corner aimed at Vernon's chest. Dudley appeared in the doorway. Looked at the table. Looked at his father. Looked at Harry. "Ha," said Dudley. "Go to your room, Dudley," Vernon said. "Why?" "Harry's not in trouble, is he?" Dudley said, and there was something different about the way he said it, not concern for Harry exactly, but something less hostile than usual. Something more like a question. Vernon turned to look at his son with the expression of a man finding unexpected obstacles everywhere. "Bed," he said. Dudley went upstairs, but Harry heard him stop on the landing, crouching down to see through the banisters. Vernon turned back to Harry. He was trying to reassemble himself into authority. Harry could see it, the way he squared his shoulders and pressed his lips together. He was, at his core, a man who believed in structure, in the knowability of things, in the solid relationship between cause and effect that made his drills work and his company run and his lawn stay green and trim. "I want a conversation," Vernon said. "A real one." Without, he waved a hand at the table. "Sit down." Harry considered this for a moment, then pulled out one of the dining chairs and sat. Vernon sat across from him, the displaced table still angled between them. Petunia stood in the doorway, not leaving. "I want to know what you can do," Vernon said. "Specifically." "Why?" Harry said. "Because I live here," Vernon said. "Because Petunia lives here and Dudley lives here and I'd like to know exactly what the situation is." It was the most reasonable thing Harry could remember Vernon saying. He thought about it honestly. "I can move things," Harry said. "Without touching them. The bigger the thing, the harder it is, but it seems to be getting easier. I can open locks. It's harder to describe the rest of it, it's more like the magic knows what I want and responds to it, rather than me doing specific things." "Like the furniture knowing to move," Petunia said quietly. Harry looked at her. "Yeah. Exactly like that." "Can you hurt someone?" Vernon said. "Yes," Harry said, because it was true and because he wasn't going to lie about it. "But I won't. Unless someone tries to hurt me first, or tries to hurt Hedwig, and then I think the magic would, sort of do it anyway, whether I specifically meant it or not. Vernon stared at him. Your school. Do they know you can do this? No, Harry said. Why not? Harry thought about how to answer this. Because I only really worked it out this summer. Because they'd want to study it and control it and I'd prefer to understand it myself first. Vernon was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his wine glass, found it empty, set it back down. What do you want, he said. From this summer. What is it that you actually want? Harry looked at him. Vernon was asking genuinely, which was strange enough to be remarkable. To do my homework, Harry said. To let my owl fly at night. I want to be left alone and I want to not be treated like he stopped. Started again. I want to be treated like I exist. The dining room was very quiet. That's all. Vernon said. That's all, Harry said. Vernon stood up. He looked at the table, still angled toward him. He looked at Harry. Then he straightened his tie and said, Petunia, I think we should let him have the shed for studying. It has the window, he can keep the owl there with him during the day. Petunia said, All right, Vernon. Vernon walked out of the dining room. Harry listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the bedroom door, the familiar sounds of Vernon's evening shutting down routine. The table walked itself back to center. Petunia looked at it. Then she looked at Harry. Something on her face was making its difficult journey from control to something more honest. She used to do that, Petunia said. Lily. The furniture. When she was angry or, when she felt something very strongly, the furniture would shift. Harry didn't say anything. You have her eyes, Petunia said. I'm sure people have told you that. Constantly, Harry said. It's not just the color, she said. She looked at him for another moment. This was the longest she'd looked at him directly in his memory, and then she went into the kitchen and ran the water and began washing up. Harry sat at the dining table for a while longer. The table sat squarely in the center of the room, ordinary and still. The water ran in the kitchen. Outside, through the window, he could see Mrs. Figg's back garden light come on. He thought about Lily Potter, who'd made furniture move when she felt things strongly. He pressed his hands flat on the surface of the table and felt the grain of the wood under his palms, and thought, I have her eyes. The shed became his. Not officially, not ceremonially, Vernon didn't make a speech about it or anything so dramatic. But the following morning the padlock was open, and by afternoon Harry had established himself in it with his school trunk, his books, a desk lamp he'd found in the spare room, and Hedwig's cage position beside the window, which he'd propped open with a pencil. The shed had a workbench along one wall and smelled like oil and summer heat and the kind of productive solitude that Harry was finding increasingly preferable to the sitting room. He set up his homework properly, transfiguration, defense, potions, charms, and worked through each morning with the focused pleasure of someone who'd been denied access to something they loved and was catching up. The magic sat under his skin and watched and occasionally weighed in, his quill moved of its own accord when he reached for it, the lamp angled itself when he tilted his head to read. Small things. Easy things. Ron sent 3 letters in 5 days, escalating from Mum wants to know if you want to come for a week to Fred says if you don't write back he's going to visit in person to Harry I'm serious Fred has a plan, please write back. Harry wrote back fond, vague reassurances. Hermione sent the promised section from Magical Theory, hand-copied in her meticulous handwriting, and it was, as she'd said, fascinating. The author was a witch named Adalind Brightwater, writing in 1887, and she described what she called ambient channeling, the ability of a witch or wizard whose magic had been channeled through a wand to continue using magic without one, not through the deliberate recovery of accidental ability, but through a kind of overflow. The wand, she wrote, does not contain the magic. It shapes it. But magic that is strong enough will find its own shape, and in young witches and wizards of exceptional potential, this self-shaping process may begin before training fully suppresses it. Harry read this 3 times. He thought about the word suppresses. He thought about 11 years of being told he was nothing, and the accidental magic that had kept breaking through anyway, growing hair back, landing on rooftops, disappearing glass. The magic hadn't stopped. It had never stopped. It had just been working without direction, without knowledge, without him understanding that it was his. He picked up his quill and wrote to Hermione, "Adelind Brightwater is brilliant. Do you know if she wrote anything else?" He was halfway through his defense reading when he heard footsteps on the garden path. Dudley. His cousin appeared in the shed doorway, hands in his pockets, wearing a look of studied nonchalance that fooled absolutely nobody. He was getting better at it. At 16, Harry thought, Dudley might be genuinely unreadable, but at 11 the effort was too visible. "What do you want, Dudley?" Harry said. "Nothing," Dudley said, looking at the shed with great interest. He examined the workbench, examined Harry's books, examined Hedwig in her cage by the window. Hedwig examined him back. "You can sit down if you want," Harry said, gesturing at an upturned bucket. Dudley looked at the bucket. Looked at Harry. Sat on the bucket. They were quiet for a moment. Harry went back to his defense reading. Dudley looked at Hedwig. "Does she bite?" Dudley said. "Not unless she dislikes you." Dudley looked slightly alarmed. "How do you know if she dislikes you?" "She'll tell you clearly," Harry said. "She'll look like this." He did a brief impression of a baleful amber stare, "and then she'll bite." Dudley studied Hedwig. Hedwig studied Dudley. She made a low sound that wasn't quite threatening. "She's okay with you," Harry said. "How can you tell?" "She'd have done it already." Dudley relaxed fractionally. "The table thing," he said, after a moment. "At dinner. Did you actually not do it?" Harry looked up. "I was in the kitchen." "Yeah, but," Dudley made a vague gesture. "Can it happen without you doing it?" "Apparently," Harry said. Dudley stopped. "That's a bit weird, isn't it?" "For me it's pretty normal," Harry said. "I meant weird that it knows," Dudley said. "Like, it moved when Dad said that thing. The out of necessity thing. Like it understood he said something." He ran out of sentence. Harry looked at his cousin for a moment. There was something unfamiliar in Dudley's face, a kind of working through, a visible effort at thinking, not performed for anyone. "I don't know if it understands," Harry said honestly. "I think it responds to what I feel, and sometimes I feel things before I consciously know I'm feeling them." Dudley thought about this. "That's clever," he said finally, in the tone of someone who'd expected something to be simple and found it wasn't. "Is it?" Harry said. "Yeah." Dudley looked at Hedwig again. "Can I give her one of those?" He pointed at the owl treats. Harry slid them across the workbench. Dudley picked one up, held it out to Hedwig with the careful caution of someone who decided to try something despite not fully trusting the situation. Hedwig looked at the treat. Looked at Dudley. Took the treat with a dignified delicacy that seemed to satisfy both parties. Dudley sat back on his bucket. "Dad's scared," he said. "I know," Harry said. He's not going to do anything. Not after the," Dudley gestured. "Not after all that. But he's scared." "I know," Harry said. "I don't want to scare him. I just want to be here normally." "There's nothing normal about you," Dudley said, and then immediately looked like he regretted saying it, which was notable because until this summer Dudley had never appeared to regret anything he'd said. "That's fair," Harry said. Dudley let out a short uncertain laugh. Then he stood up, brushed himself off, and went back toward the house. He stopped at the shed door. "Mum left a book in your room," he said, not turning around. "I know. I saw her get it. She went out and got it." He paused. "She didn't say anything to Dad." Then he went inside. Harry looked at Hedwig. She looked back with the amber certainty of an animal that understood things without needing them explained. "Yeah," Harry said. He turned back to his defense reading. The shed was warm and smelled like oil, and outside the day was doing something pleasant with the light through the window, and Hedwig preened, and somewhere in the house the furniture held its various positions and kept its own counsel. Harry read 3 more chapters without interruption and felt, with growing conviction, that this was going to be the most interesting summer he'd ever had. Chapter 3, The Kitchen Intervenes. Marge Dursley arrived on a Friday. Harry knew she was coming because Vernon had told him on Monday, in the careful, preemptive tone of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "My sister visits Friday through Sunday," he'd said, over breakfast, not looking up from his paper. "She'll have Ripper with her. You will be," he'd searched for the right word, "cooperative." "Cooperative how?" Harry had asked. Vernon had looked up. "Civil, quiet. Absent, if possible." Harry had thought about this. "I'll be civil," he'd said. Vernon had looked at him steadily for a moment, reassessing what civil meant from Harry now, which was reasonable because it meant something completely different than it used to. "That'll do," he'd said, and gone back to his paper. Harry had spent the rest of the week finishing his charms essay, corresponding with Hermione about Adalind Brightwater's second published work, The Ambient Witch, Further Notes on Unchanneled Magic, 1891, which Hermione had tracked down in the library with the focused intensity of a bloodhound, and having a series of ongoing chess games with himself using his wizard chess set, which had the advantage of pieces that argued with him about strategy and the disadvantage of pieces that took losing extremely personally. He'd also, quietly, practiced. This wasn't dramatic practice, he wasn't hurling things around the shed or lighting fires. It was the opposite of dramatic. He'd sit with his hands in his lap and move a pencil 3 inches to the left. Pick up his quill without touching it. Hold Hedwig's water dish steady while he filled it from across the room. Small, precise things, getting the feel of it, the same way you'd practice a chord on a guitar until it stopped requiring thought. The interesting thing was the range. On Monday he could manage objects within arm's reach with real precision and larger objects up to about 10 feet with reasonable reliability. By Thursday the precision was solid to 15 feet, and he'd successfully turned the key in the shed padlock from the far end of the garden without thinking about it particularly hard. He told Hermione this in a letter, and she wrote back within 12 hours, "Harry, this is not normal. I mean this with the greatest respect and genuine excitement. A trained adult witch or wizard doing wandless telekinesis with that kind of range and precision would be considered remarkable. Please be careful, and also please tell me everything." He wrote back, "I'll tell you everything in September. Stay excited." So when Friday arrived, he was feeling, in a quiet and unglamorous way, very solid. Not invincible, he wasn't stupid, but grounded. Like he'd located something that had always been there and was now standing on it instead of swimming above it. Then the car turned into the drive and Marge Dursley got out, and everything became immediately more complicated. The problem with Marge wasn't malice, exactly. Malice implied forethought, a decision to be cruel. Marge was something more thoughtless than malicious. She was like weather. She filled whatever room she occupied with loud, confident opinions and a deep certainty that her opinions were not only correct but valuable to the world, and she directed her particular attentions at Harry with the focused indifference of someone who decided long ago that he was a problem requiring explanation, and the explanation she'd settled on was bad blood. She came through the front door in a wave of perfume, and dog, Ripper, her English bulldog, a creature of impressive ugliness and limited intellect who had apparently been awake for the entire drive and was making his feelings on the subject clearly known. Marge wore a tweed skirt and a blouse in a shade of yellow that suggested she'd asked for mustard and been given something more aggressive, and she greeted Vernon with the particular warmth she reserved for him, which was approximately the warmth of a small personal heater, functional, present, not extending much beyond 2 feet. She greeted Petunia with polite competitiveness. She greeted Dudley with genuine affection. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone finding a persistent piece of furniture in an inconvenient location. "You've grown," she said, which wasn't a compliment from Marge. she said it the way you'd note that a weed had gotten bigger. "Hello, Aunt Marge," Harry said. Ripper made a low sound at Harry's feet. Harry looked at the dog. The dog looked at Harry with the intelligent wariness of an animal that sensed things even when humans didn't, and then, after a moment's consideration, sat down. Marge looked at Ripper. Then at Harry. Then she went into the sitting room. Harry went to the shed. The first evening was manageable by the pure physics of separation. Harry ate quickly, said almost nothing, and retreated before Marge could build up conversational momentum. This was a tactic he'd used in previous summers and it worked up to a point. The point, historically, being the moment Marge ran out of things to say about Dudley's accomplishments, Vernon's professional excellence, and her own dogs, at which point she turned to Harry as a source of fresh material. That moment came at Saturday breakfast. Harry came down at 7:30, later than usual, hoping to eat before Marge materialized. Marge was already at the table, Ripper at her feet, eating an enormous plate of eggs with the focused enjoyment of someone who considered breakfast a serious undertaking. "Sit down, boy," she said, without looking up. "Petunia, the coffee's weak." Harry sat down. He poured himself juice and took 2 pieces of toast and began eating. "Still at that school?" Marge said. "Yes," Harry said. "What was it?" "St. Brutus's." Harry looked at Vernon, who was looking at his newspaper with the expression of a man trying to make himself two-dimensional. "Different school," Harry said. Marge ate eggs. "What sort of school?" "It's in Scotland." "Boarding?" "Yes." "Good school." "Best in the country, actually," Harry said. Marge made a sound that suggested she found this unlikely. "What are you learning?" "History. Astronomy. Science." He paused. "A lot of practical work." "Practical what?" "Applied," he thought about it, "applied natural philosophy." Marge looked at him. "That sounds like something they'd say when they can't teach you properly." "I think it's something they say when the lessons are very specific," Harry said pleasantly. Marge refilled her coffee. She looked at Harry the way she always looked at Harry when she was deciding which angle to approach from. He'd seen this look his whole life and it had always made him want to become very small. Now it just felt like weather assessment. "Your father was a drunk and a layabout," Marge said, to the table generally. The kitchen was completely still. Harry took a bite of toast. He chewed it. He swallowed it. He took a sip of juice. "He wasn't," Harry said. "I beg your pardon." "My father wasn't a drunk or a layabout," Harry said. "He was a Quidditch player and a brilliant student and he died before he was 22. You never met him." Marge's eyes went wide. This was not how Harry was supposed to respond. The response template Harry had always used, the silent endurance, the looking at the table, the waiting for it to end, was apparently not operating this morning, and Marge looked slightly destabilized by the upgrade. "I've heard plenty about James Potter," she said, recovering. "From Vernon," Harry said. "Who also never met him." "Now listen here, I'm just pointing out," Harry said, "that it's a fairly confident thing to call someone a drunk when your entire information source is a man who met the subject 0 times. Marge's face had gone the color of a cooked prawn. Vernon made a very careful movement with his newspaper, which Harry interpreted as "please stop." "You have your father's rudeness," Marge said. "I have his eyes, actually," Harry said. "His eyes and his hair. My eyes are my mum's." He finished his toast, drank the last of his juice, and stood up. "Lovely breakfast. I'm going to the shed." He picked up his plate, put it in the sink, and walked out of the kitchen. Behind him he heard Marge make a sound that was mostly air, and then Vernon saying something low and urgent, and then Marge saying distinctly, "I've never seen such impertinence." Harry closed the shed door and sat at his desk and pressed his hands flat on the surface and breathed. The magic was awake. He could feel it. It was that pressurized feeling, warm and alert under his ribs, that meant something had been accumulating and was ready to move if he let it. He didn't let it. He breathed deliberately, in, hold, out, and thought, not yet. She's not worth it. The magic subsided, grumbling, like a dog called off. By noon it was clear that Marge had decided Saturday was going to be a full working day. She circled back to Harry at lunch, at the moment when Petunia had gone to answer the phone and Vernon was momentarily distracted by Ripper attempting to eat something under the table, and she said, quietly and with the specific satisfaction of someone who'd been saving this, "Your mother was the same way, you know." Common. Harry looked up from his soup. "She came from nowhere," Marge said. "No family to speak of." "No, my mother was brilliant," Harry said. "Top of her year. One of the best of her generation. At whatever peculiar school, at the best school in the country," Harry said. "Which I mentioned this morning." "And look how she ended up," Marge said. "Married to a useless." Something happened to the salt shaker. It didn't fly across the room. It didn't shatter. It simply traveled, quickly and deliberately, from its position near the pepper grinder to a point approximately 6 inches from Marge's elbow, where it stopped. Not clattered. Not rolled. Stopped. Placed. Marge looked at it. Everyone at the table looked at it. The salt shaker sat on the table in its new location and was extremely still. "Vernon," Marge said carefully. "I see it," Vernon said. "That moved on its own." "I'm aware, Marge. Salt shakers do not move on their own." "In this house," Vernon said, with the particular exhaustion of a man who'd been revising his understanding of salt shakers for 3 weeks, "they sometimes do." Marge looked at Harry. Harry was eating his soup. "Did you?" she started. "I didn't touch it," Harry said, which was perfectly true. "Then how?" "I honestly don't know," Harry said, which was less true but not entirely false. He hadn't consciously moved it, which was beginning to be the interesting thing. The magic was getting faster than his decisions. Marge stared at the salt shaker. Her face had done several things in rapid succession and had arrived at an expression Harry hadn't seen from her before, not anger, not contempt, but something that sat uncomfortably close to unease. She was a woman who'd built her entire personality on the solid ground of certainty, and the salt shaker was undermining the geology. Ripper, under the table, made a very small sound and moved closer to Marge's feet. "I need some air," Marge said, and pushed back from the table. She went into the back garden. The back door closed with some force. Through the window Harry could see her standing on the lawn with her arms crossed, talking to herself, doing the slow and deliberate breathing of someone recalibrating. Dudley had been sitting at the end of the table this whole time. He looked at the salt shaker. He looked at Harry. He said, to nobody in particular, "That's 3. Third piece of furniture." Petunia said. "Salt shaker," Dudley said. "Armchair, table, salt shaker." "The salt shaker's not furniture, Dudley," Petunia said. "Kitchen object," Dudley amended. "Still counts." Harry finished his soup. By Saturday evening, the kitchen had fully committed to the project. It started small. The window above the sink, which had been reliably difficult to open all summer, opened itself when Marge came in to get a glass of water, letting in a draft directly from the north that caught her perfectly blow-dried hair. The cabinet where the good glasses lived swung open without invitation, not hitting anyone, just open, specifically when Marge reached for it. The chair at the end of the kitchen table, the chair Marge had claimed as hers the moment she arrived, imperially, by simply sitting in it first, developed a tendency to tilt very slightly, not enough to tip, just enough to be perceptible, any time Marge said something about Harry's parents. None of this was Harry. Or rather, none of this was Harry deciding. It was Harry existing in the kitchen while Marge talked, and the magic deciding on his behalf with the autonomous conviction of a thing that had gotten tired of waiting to be directed. The most impressive moment was the gravy. Sunday lunch. A full spread. Petunia had cooked a roast, which meant the kitchen had been warm and fragrant all morning, and Marge had taken this as license to sit at the kitchen table throughout, offering commentary on the cooking that was not strictly requested. Harry was laying the table. Marge was explaining, at length, why she believed that a boy raised without a firm hand produced, as an adult, what she would call a thoroughly bad egg, and this was, Harry understood, aimed at him, a general monologue about character and discipline and bloodlines delivered in a third person because apparently Marge had decided direct address wasn't working. Harry set out the plates. "It's in the nature," Marge said. "Bad blood will tell. You can dress it up, you can send it to whatever fancy school in Scotland." The gravy boat moved. It was on the counter, full, waiting to go to the table. It lifted, not levitated, not dramatically, but got its feet off the counter by about half an inch, traveled in a smooth arc to the table, and descended gently next to the roast. Everyone in the kitchen watched this happen. Marge had stopped mid-sentence. The gravy boat sat on the table, steaming gently. "I think," Harry said, picking up the serving spoon and handing it to Petunia, "lunch is ready." Petunia took the spoon. Her lips were pressed together in the expression she used when she was not going to laugh but was having a serious conversation with herself about it. "Marge," Vernon said. "Come and sit down." Marge sat down. She sat down at the table and she looked at the gravy boat and she looked at Harry and she picked up her fork and she ate lunch in a silence that Harry had never heard from her, not the silence of someone choosing not to speak but the silence of someone whose speaking machinery had temporarily encountered an obstacle. It was, Harry thought, the best roast he'd ever eaten. The afternoon arrived with a specific, waiting quality, like the air before a storm that had been building for 3 days and was finally ready to say something. Harry went to the shed after lunch. He'd reached an interesting chapter in the ambient witch, Brightwater's discussion of what she called sympathetic resonance, the idea that magic could attune to the emotional environment of a space rather than just the emotional state of the witch or wizard, and he was halfway through making notes when he heard the knock at the shed door. Not Dudley's knock. Dudley knocked twice with one knuckle, tentative, exploratory. This was Marge. 3 solid knocks, assertive, a knock that expected to be answered. Harry closed his book. "Come in," he said. Marge opened the shed door. She looked at the shed with the expression she used for things she considered beneath her, then looked at Harry, then at Hedwig, who regarded her from her perch with amber clarity. "Can I sit?" Marge said. Harry gestured at the bucket. Marge looked at the bucket. She was not a bucket-sitting person. She sat on it anyway, arranging herself with the dignity of someone sitting in an armchair, and folded her hands on her knee. "I want to understand," she said, without preamble. "Understand what?" Harry said. "What you are." She said it without cruelty, which was unusual. It came out more like a scientist than a critic. "What this is." "I'm a wizard," Harry said. "That's what it is." "Like Petunia's sister." "Like my mother," Harry said. "Yes." Marge looked at Hedwig. "The furniture." "The magic," Harry said. "The furniture is just where it tends to end up. Can you control it?" Harry thought about this. "More than I could 3 weeks ago," he said honestly. "Less than I'll be able to in 3 years, probably." "Does it?" Marge stopped. Tried again. "Does it know things?" It was such a strange question from Marge that Harry just looked at her for a moment. "What do you mean?" "It moves when something's said." She was looking at her folded hands. "It responded to what was said about your parents." "It responded to she waved a hand. "I've been watching it all weekend." "It's not random." "No," Harry agreed. "It's not random." "Does it know what's cruel?" she said, and her voice had changed slightly on the word cruel, something in it catching, something examined and then quickly released. Harry looked at her properly. At the lines around her mouth, the determined set of her shoulders. At someone who had spent, he thought, a considerable amount of her life being certain she was right about things, and was now sitting on an upturned bucket in a garden shed confronting the possibility that certainty was a limited tool. "I think it responds to what's true," Harry said slowly. "When someone says something false about someone I care about, like my parents, I feel it. And when I feel it, the magic does something." Marge was quiet. "My parents weren't what you said they were," Harry said. Not angrily. Just clearly. "I don't know where you got the version of them that you have, but it's wrong. My dad was, by all accounts he was funny and loyal, and he was an excellent student and a good friend. He died protecting my mum. My mum was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, not just school brilliant, and she was brave and she was kind, and she also died protecting me." He paused. "I don't have much else. Just those two things. Just what they were. So when someone calls them names, the magic," he glanced at the shed wall, toward the kitchen, "the magic disagrees." Marge sat on the bucket for a long moment. "I didn't know them," she said finally. "I only had Vernon's version." "Vernon didn't know them either," Harry said. "No." She pressed her lips together. "He didn't." She stood up, which took a moment given the bucket's architecture. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at Harry with an expression he genuinely could not categorize, not warm, not apologetic, not transformed, but something quieter than everything else she'd shown him this weekend. Something that was possibly the beginning of an adjustment. "I'll be civil," she said, which was exactly what Vernon had said to Harry 3 weeks ago, and the echo of it was so precise that Harry almost laughed. "That's all I ask," Harry said. She left without saying anything else. At the shed door she paused, and without turning around she said, "Your mother's eyes, you said." "Yes," Harry said. "They were, she had very striking eyes," Marge said, stilted, like the sentence had to be forced out past something. "Lily. I saw her, once. At a Christmas thing. She had striking eyes." Then she went back to the house. Harry sat in the shed for a while after that, doing nothing in particular. Hedwig hopped along her perch, made a sound, hopped back. The afternoon light came through the window at a long angle. He picked up his quill and wrote, at the top of a fresh piece of parchment, "Dear Professor Dumbledore." He wrote 3 drafts. The first one was too angry, not shouting angry, just a specific kind of cold precise anger that got into the sentence structure and made everything pointed. He looked at it, thought about it, put it aside. The second one was too careful, he'd overcorrected, hedged everything, and it came out reading like a letter written by someone who was trying not to upset anyone, which was the old way of doing things and not useful. The third one was right. "Dear Professor Dumbledore, I hope you are well. I'm writing from Privet Drive, where I'm spending the summer as usual. I wanted to raise a few things with you directly, since I understand from Mrs. Figg that you've been receiving reports on my situation here and have assessed it as manageable. I think we should talk about what manageable means. I'm not in physical danger. The Dursleys don't like me particularly, but they're not hurting me. The protection you've described, the blood protection from my mother, I understand it and I believe it works. So I'm not writing to ask you to move me or to complain. I'm writing because you've been getting reports on my welfare for 10 years and you've kept me here based on them, and I'd like to discuss what those reports said and what decisions were made. Not because I'm angry, I am a little angry, but because I think I'm old enough to have that conversation, and I think you may be underestimating both what's been happening at this house and what I'm capable of. I'm also writing because something interesting has been happening with my magic this summer and I'd like your honest assessment of it, rather than the ministry's, which I suspect would involve a lot of forms. I'd be happy to have this conversation by letter or in person. I leave that to you. Sincerely, Harry Potter. He read it through once. Then he tied it to Hedwig's leg, whispered, "Hogwarts, but take your time," and let her out the window. She caught the last of the afternoon thermals and rose in a wide arc over the rooftops, and Harry watched her until she was a white dot against the early evening sky. Marge left Sunday after lunch. The goodbye was brief and involved a lot of activity with Ripper's travel equipment that served as useful cover for the avoidance of direct conversation. She said goodbye to Vernon and Dudley with her usual warmth, said something to Petunia about the lamb, and paused when she came to Harry. "Civil," she said. "Civil," Harry agreed. She nodded once, loaded Ripper into the car, and drove away. Harry stood on the front step and watched the car go, and felt something release in the air around the house, a specific tension unwinding, like the house exhaling. Vernon stood beside him for a moment. "She won't be back until Christmas," he said. "Right," Harry said. "She won't say anything about the—" Vernon made a gesture. "I know," Harry said. "How do you know?" Harry thought about Marge on the bucket, asking if the magic knew what was cruel. "Because she's not sure what she'd say," he said. "And she doesn't like not being sure." Vernon looked at him for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't quite read, not warm, never going to be warm, but something that had moved several notches from where it started. "Dinner's at 7, Vernon said, and went inside. Harry sat on the front step in the late afternoon and looked at the perfectly ordinary street. 3 doors down, a neighbor was washing a car. 2 doors up, a woman was bringing in her wheeled bin. The light was doing that specific Sunday evening thing it did in England, golden and slightly regretful, as though the weekend had been better than anticipated and the knowledge that Monday was coming was coloring everything amber. He heard the front door behind him and Dudley came out and sat on the step beside him, which was unprecedented and required a moment of adjustment from both of them. "She was nicer to you at the end," Dudley said. "A bit," Harry said. "What did you say to her in the shed?" "I told her the truth about my parents." Dudley thought about this. He had a packet of crisps that he opened with care and offered to Harry, which was also unprecedented. Dudley had never voluntarily shared food with Harry in his life. Harry took a couple of crisps. "Dad's never said anything good about them," Dudley said. "Your mum and dad?" "No," Harry said. "Did they, were they actually?" Dudley stopped, reconfigured. "Were they actually good? Like, not just because they're your parents?" Harry looked at the street. He thought about everything he'd learned in his first year, the sorting hat, Hagrid's stories, the way Professor McGonagall's expression changed when she mentioned James Potter, the photograph album Hagrid had given him, all those faces looking out at him. His father's grin. His mother's eyes. "Yeah," he said. "They actually were." Dudley ate crisps. He started. "I know," Harry said. They sat on the step until Petunia called them in for dinner, and neither of them said anything else, which was somehow more than enough. The letter came back the next morning. Not from Dumbledore, too soon for that, it would take Hedwig time to reach Hogwarts and more time if Dumbledore was elsewhere. This letter came from a different owl, a large tawny one Harry didn't recognize, which arrived at the shed window at 6 in the morning and dropped a sealed envelope with such authority that Harry woke up from the sound. He opened it. It was brief, written in a hand he didn't recognize, small, neat, economical, "Mr. Potter. I am aware of certain developments at your address. I will be visiting within the fortnight. Please continue as you are. APWBD." Harry looked at the initials. Looked at them again. APWBD. He set the letter on the desk. He looked at the shed ceiling. Outside the window, the early morning was doing something blue and quiet, that specific hour before the day remembered what it was. "Dumbledore," he said to the ceiling. The ceiling didn't comment. He picked up the letter again and read it 3 more times. "Please continue as you are." He turned the phrase over. It wasn't permission, exactly, it wasn't the ministry's 3-owl alarm system or a prohibition or a list of warnings. It was something that sounded almost like observation. Like Dumbledore had read Harry's letter and looked at his monitoring charms and then looked at his monitoring charms again and was now doing what Harry suspected Dumbledore rarely did, waiting to see what happened next. Harry set the letter down. He looked at Hedwig's empty perch, she'd be back in a day, she was fast, and at his books stacked neatly on the workbench, and at the ambient which opened to the chapter on sympathetic resonance, and at his homework pile, 3/4 done and ahead of schedule, and at the shed that had been a padlocked storage space 2 weeks ago and was now something else entirely. He picked up his quill. He wrote to Ron, "Things are interesting. Get your mum to start planning the visit, but I'm good until August. Tell Fred and George, you know what, tell them whatever you want." He wrote to Hermione, "I wrote to Dumbledore." He responded. "He's coming to visit. I think I've done something." He put the quill down and looked at the second letter and felt the word coming before he could shape it into anything more specific. Good, he thought. Outside, the morning was fully arriving now, birds, light, the neighbor's car reversing out of the drive, the world resuming its ordinary operation. Somewhere in the house, the dining table sat squarely in the center of the dining room and held its position, and the armchair occupied its corner in the sitting room with the dignified patience of something that had weighed in on events and was content to wait for the next ones. Harry opened the ambient witch to chapter 7 and began to read. Chapter 4, The Whole House. Dumbledore arrived on a Wednesday. Harry knew he was coming because the letter had said within the fortnight and it had been 13 days, and because that morning Hedwig had come back from wherever she'd been overnight and immediately settled on her perch with the particular stillness she used when something significant was about to happen, not anxious, just alert, the way an animal knows weather before any instrument does. Harry had been awake since 5. Not from nerves, exactly, more from the specific restlessness of waiting for something he'd initiated himself, which was different from the waiting he was used to. The waiting he was used to was passive, the waiting of someone things happen to. This was different. He'd written the letter. He'd asked for the meeting. Whatever was coming down the road this morning, he'd sent for it. He dressed, fed Hedwig, worked through 2 pages of his potions essay with half his attention, and was in the garden pulling the last of the week's weeds when the gate at the end of the garden path clicked open. Dumbledore looked exactly as he had at Hogwarts, the half-moon glasses, the long silver beard, the robes, which were deep blue today and had small embroidered stars on them that occasionally moved. He looked absolutely, flagrantly, incomprehensibly out of place on Privet Drive, the way a cathedral would look out of place in a car park. He looked at Harry in the flower bed, crouched in the dirt with a handful of weeds, and his expression was unreadable for a moment before it settled into something that was almost warm. "Harry," he said. "Professor," Harry said. He stood up and brushed his hands off on his jeans. He didn't feel the urge to look at the ground or to manage his expression, and this seemed to register with Dumbledore. Those bright blue eyes moved over Harry with the quick attention of someone recalibrating in real time. "I thought we might talk," Dumbledore said. "I know. Come in." Harry gestured toward the shed. "I can make tea." Dumbledore looked at the shed. "In there?" "I've been using it as a study," Harry said. "It's more comfortable than the house." "I suspect," Dumbledore said, stepping onto the garden path, "that a great deal has become more comfortable here than it used to be." "That's one way to put it," Harry said. The shed was not designed for Dumbledore. This became apparent approximately 2 seconds after they entered it. Dumbledore was taller than the shed quite expected, and his robes took up more ambient space than the square footage suggested, and Hedwig, who had been asleep on her perch, opened one eye and regarded him with an amber assessment that took considerably longer than her assessment of most visitors. Harry had a small camp stove he'd rescued from the back of the house, and a kettle, and 2 mugs. He put the kettle on and moved his books aside and pulled the bucket close to the desk for Dumbledore with the absolute absence of ceremony of someone who decided that ceremony was a waste of time today. Dumbledore sat on the bucket. He sat on it with the same absolute dignity with which he presumably sat on the headmaster's chair at Hogwarts, like it wasn't a bucket at all, like sitting on it was simply his current choice and he could equally choose a throne. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been reading," Harry said, pouring water into the kettle. "And practicing. Mrs. Figg wrote to me as well," Dumbledore said. "I know she would. She's been writing to me for 10 years, Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice on that sentence, not quite apology, more like the careful handling of a subject he'd already decided he owed Harry. "She told me," Harry said. She told me what the reports said and what you decided based on them. And? Harry turned around and looked at him. And I want to hear your version before I say what I think about it. Something moved in Dumbledore's eyes. That's very fair, he said. I'm trying to be, Harry said. But I'm not going to pretend I don't have feelings about it, so you might as well know that going in. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Then I'll tell you the whole of it, he said, and not the managed version. The kettle began to warm. Outside, a wood pigeon landed on the shed roof and added its opinion briefly before leaving. Dumbledore talked for a long time. Not in the way that Harry had half expected, the long, winding, metaphor-heavy way he sometimes spoke at Hogwarts, full of diversions and tangents that you followed so long that by the time you arrived at the point you'd forgotten where you started. This was different. He spoke in the direct register of someone who decided that the usual conversational architecture wasn't appropriate for the audience, and what he said was this: when Lily and James died, there had been two options. The wizarding world had been in ruins, Voldemort's followers scattered, the man himself destroyed, everyone celebrating so loudly that nobody was thinking clearly about what came next. Option 1 was the wizarding world itself, a good family, a safe house, protection from the remaining Death Eaters. Option 2 was Petunia Dursley, who had Lily's blood, and who lived in a Muggle suburb where nobody would think to look, and whose very ordinariness was a form of camouflage. Dumbledore had chosen option 2. I made that choice, he said, believing that the blood protection was the most significant factor. That as long as you were alive and in that house, you were safer than you could be anywhere else. And the other factors, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Were judged secondary. You knew what they were like, Harry said. It wasn't a question. I knew what Petunia was like. I knew that she resented magic and had resented her sister and that she was, not a warm person, as far as you were concerned. He paused. I believed that duty and blood would produce a minimum standard of care. Minimum, Harry said. Yes. You knew for 10 years that minimum was what I was getting. Yes, Dumbledore said. The word sat between them in the small space of the shed, and Dumbledore let it sit, which Harry respected more than anything he could have said around it. He didn't dress it, didn't explain it into something softer. He said yes and let Harry look at it. And the monitoring charms, Harry said. Showed that you were alive and uninjured, Dumbledore said. They were not subtle instruments. They measured harm at a level that he stopped. That I set too high. Harry poured the tea. He handed Dumbledore a mug and sat on the desk chair and wrapped both hands around his own mug and thought about what to say next. I'm not going to pretend, Harry said, that the blood protection isn't real. I understand it. I know my mum's death did something and that this house is where it lives. I'm not asking to leave. What are you asking? Dumbledore said. I'm asking you to stop calling it manageable, Harry said. Whatever happens here, whatever has happened, it's real. It happened. And I need you to know that I know that, and that I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make the arrangement cleaner. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. That's a very precise request, he said. I've had time to think about what I wanted to say. I can see that. Dumbledore set his tea down on the edge of the workbench. There's something else. Your letter mentioned your magic. Yes, Harry said. Tell me. Harry told him. He told it plainly, in order, without dramatizing it, the door bolt on the first night, the deliberate opening and closing of the lock, the armchair, the table at dinner, Marge. He described the practicing in the shed, the pencil, the quill, the padlock at 15 feet. He told Dumbledore about reading Brightwater and what he thought it meant. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which was its own form of respect. His expression stayed calm throughout, but his eyes were doing something very active, taking things in, connecting them, the mind behind the half-moon glasses running hard. When Harry finished, the shed was quiet for a moment. Range and precision, Dumbledore said. Getting better, Harry said. I've been measuring it. What's your current reliable range? 20 feet, precise. 40 feet, rougher. I can feel larger things, the house, if I push, I can feel where things are, but I can't control them at that range, not specifically. Dumbledore picked up his tea again and looked at it. You understand that this is extraordinary. Hermione said the same thing. Miss Granger is correct, Dumbledore said. Adult witches and wizards, trained, experienced, typically require a wand for directed telekinesis beyond a few feet. The magical precision you're describing, without a wand, at your age, after less than 2 weeks of conscious practice, he stopped. Harry. I want to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly. I usually do, Harry said. Has it felt dangerous? Dumbledore said. The magic. Not to others, has it felt dangerous to you? Has it taken anything from you, cost you anything, left you depleted or, no, Harry said. The opposite, actually. The more I use it, the more, he searched for the right word, the more settled it feels. Like it was already there taking up space and now it's moving around, and that's easier than it's sitting still. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Adelind Brightwater, he said finally. Interesting choice of reading material. Hermione found the first one and I found the second. Her third book, Dumbledore said, was privately published and suppressed by the Ministry in 1903. I have a copy. I'll send it to you. Harry raised an eyebrow. Suppressed why? Because she argued that certain witches and wizards had what she called native magic, magic so deeply integrated into their fundamental being that the wand didn't channel it so much as, she used the phrase negotiate with it. The Ministry found this alarming. Why? Because it suggested those witches and wizards couldn't be controlled through conventional wand licensing, Dumbledore said simply. If magic doesn't require the wand, the Ministry's primary mechanism of regulation becomes academic. Harry sat with this for a moment. Is that what I am? Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon glasses with an expression that was, Harry thought, as close to wonder as it got on that particular face. I think, he said, that you may be the clearest example of it I have ever encountered. Is it to do with Voldemort? Harry said. The scar. The thing he did. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm not afraid of the answer, Harry said. I'd just rather have it. I believe, Dumbledore said carefully, that the night Voldemort's curse rebounded, it did more than leave a scar. Something of his power passed into you. Not his self, not his person, but his raw magical force. Combined with what you inherited from both your parents, it amplified something. He looked at his tea. I should have anticipated this more clearly than I did. Why didn't you? Because I was focused on the danger of that inheritance rather than the strength of it, Dumbledore said. I watched for signs of darkness. I didn't watch carefully enough for signs of power. Outside, a car passed on the street. Normal, distant, entirely separate from the conversation in the shed. I'm not dark, Harry said. No, Dumbledore said. You're not. He said it with the simple conviction of someone who didn't feel the need to hedge it. Harry drank his tea. What do you want to do about it? Nothing, Dumbledore said. Harry looked up. I want to observe it, Dumbledore said. I want to send you Brightwater's third book and I want you to keep practicing and I want to know, by September, what your honest assessment of your own abilities is. He paused. And I want you to tell me if it changes. If something frightens you. If it does something you don't recognize. And the Ministry? The Ministry, Dumbledore said, with a carefully modulated expression, doesn't need to be involved in every conversation. They went inside for lunch. This was Dumbledore's suggestion, which surprised Harry, and it surprised Harry further that he agreed to it so readily, but there was something in the way Dumbledore said it, perhaps we might go inside, that suggested it wasn't just about food. That there was something he wanted to see. Harry opened the back door and they came through the kitchen, and Petunia turned from the counter and saw Albus Dumbledore standing in her kitchen, and her entire face did something very controlled and very rapid and settled into an expression that was composed of approximately equal parts. One knew this was coming and I wasn't ready for it today. Professor Dumbledore, she said. Petunia, Dumbledore said. It's good to see you. Is it, she said, which wasn't hostile so much as honest. Your house looks well, Dumbledore said. He looked around the kitchen with an attentiveness that Harry understood wasn't admiring the decor. He was reading it, taking in the placement of things, the temperature of the room, the specific quality of the air in a house where magic had been moving freely for 3 weeks. There've been some changes, Petunia said. So I understand, Dumbledore said. May I sit? She gestured at the kitchen table. They all sat, Dumbledore, Harry, and Petunia, with an empty fourth chair where Vernon might have been if it had been a different day. Vernon was at work, which Harry suspected Dumbledore had arranged through some mechanism that didn't involve coincidence. I wanted to speak to you as well, Dumbledore said to Petunia. Not only to Harry. Petunia straightened slightly. About what you've been doing, Dumbledore said, and the gentleness with which he said it was very precise, like something handled carefully not because it was fragile but because it was valuable. A silence. I don't know what you mean, Petunia said. The book, Harry said quietly. On my desk. Petunia looked at him. Then at the table. It was, I just thought it might be useful. It was, Harry said. Very. I'm not, she stopped. I'm not saying I was wrong. About any of it. The choices we made. Nobody's asking you to, Dumbledore said. She pressed her lips together, looked at the window, looked back. He's Lily's boy. Whatever I've thought about all of it, he's Lily's boy, and the furniture was moving around and he was in the shed reading on his own and nobody was. She stopped again. Harry didn't say anything. Dumbledore said, it takes courage, Petunia, to revisit a decision that has organized your life for 20 years. Don't, she said sharply. Don't compliment me for the bare minimum. All right, Dumbledore said. He didn't back away from it, but he accepted the correction. They sat for a moment in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but was honest, which was its own achievement for this kitchen table. Will you eat something? Petunia said, getting up. If it's not too much trouble, Dumbledore said. It's not, she said, and turned to the counter. Harry watched her make sandwiches. She did it efficiently, without fuss, and after a moment she said, without turning around, he has her hands. Did you know that? Lily had narrow hands, long fingers. He has them. I noticed it when he was a baby. She put the sandwiches on a plate and brought them to the table. She was so proud of him, Petunia said, sitting down. Even before, just the idea of him. She used to write letters. She looked at Harry, direct, which she still didn't do easily. She wrote me letters about you. Before she died. From wherever they were hiding. She described everything you did. Every small thing. Harry's chest did something complex. I didn't write back, Petunia said. I had my reasons and they were mine and I'm not going to explain them. But she wrote. Harry said, do you still have them? A long pause. Somewhere, Petunia said. I'd have to look. I'd like to read them, Harry said. If you'd let me. Petunia looked at the plate of sandwiches. I'll look, she said. They ate lunch. Vernon arrived home at 5:30. Harry heard the car and sat very still in the sitting room, where he and Dumbledore had been talking for the better part of 2 hours. The front door opened and Vernon came in with his briefcase and his commuter's expression, that specific end-of-day compression of a man arriving at the place he needed to decompress, and then he walked into the sitting room and stopped. Dumbledore was in Vernon's armchair. The armchair had, without any perceptible movement, positioned itself slightly more centrally in the room than usual, and Dumbledore occupied it with the absolute naturalness of a man who'd been sitting in armchairs since before Vernon's grandparents were born. Vernon looked at Dumbledore. He looked at Harry on the sofa. He looked at his armchair. "Mr. Dursley," Dumbledore said. "Please do sit down." Vernon put his briefcase down. He sat on the sofa, on the end furthest from Harry, with the stiff careful movement of someone not sure what the rules are but unwilling to reveal their ignorance. "I'm Albus Dumbledore," Dumbledore said. "Harry's headmaster." "I know who you are," Vernon said. Not rudely. More like confirmation. "I've been here most of the day," Dumbledore said. "I hope that hasn't inconvenienced your household." "No," Vernon said, which was probably the most disciplined thing he'd said in months. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. "I'd like to speak plainly, if I may." "Please," Vernon said, with the expression of someone who decided that plain speaking, whatever it contained, was preferable to not knowing. "Harry will be here until the 1st of September, Dumbledore said. He's asked for very little, the ability to do his schoolwork, his owl's freedom, and to be treated as," he glanced at Harry, "as a person of some worth. I think these are not unreasonable requests." There have been adjustments," Vernon said. "So I understand," Dumbledore said. "And I think the adjustments have been in the right direction." Vernon looked at Harry again. Harry met his look and said nothing. "The magic," Vernon said to Dumbledore. "The things that have been, what he's been doing." "What he's been doing," Dumbledore said gently, "is living in his home. The magic is his. It responds to how he's treated and how he feels, and it will continue to do so." A pause. "I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not going to pretend it will stop." "It doesn't," he said. "It won't hurt anyone," Vernon said. He was looking at Harry. "Not unless threatened," Harry said. Vernon's hands on his knees tightened slightly. "Right," he said. "Vernon." Dumbledore's voice changed slightly, became something less formal and more direct. "I've been looking out for Harry's welfare from a distance for 10 years. I'm aware that I could have done better by that. You have him for 6 more weeks and then he goes back to school. 6 weeks of a child who wants nothing more complicated than to do his homework and be treated like he matters." He paused. "I hope you can manage that." Vernon's face had gone through several things and arrived at something complicated. He looked at Harry, really looked at him, the way he almost never did, the full-on looking that meant something was being considered. "Yes," Vernon said. "We can manage that." Harry watched his uncle's face and thought, manageable. He thought about the word and how much it had cost Dumbledore to use it differently today, to apply it to the situation rather than to Harry, to ask someone else to manage and expect Harry to be managed. He thought about that. "Good," Dumbledore said, and he stood. Dumbledore left at 6. Harry walked him to the front gate, the two of them coming through the house and out the front door into the evening, which had done its summer thing of staying light much longer than seemed reasonable. At the gate, Dumbledore paused. "The 3rd Brightwater book," he said. "I'll send it within the week. There's a chapter in it that I think will interest you particularly." "Which chapter?" "The one about intent," Dumbledore said. "Specifically, her argument that magic operating at a native level doesn't just respond to what the witch or wizard wants, it responds to what they are. Their fundamental character. The word she uses is essence." He looked at Harry. "She argues that this is why native magic is both more powerful and fundamentally safer than wand-directed magic. You can misdirect a wand. You cannot misdirect what you are." Harry thought about this. "The furniture wasn't misdirected." "No," Dumbledore said. "It went exactly where it needed to go." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the house behind Harry. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the years that required this conversation." "I know," Harry said. "I made decisions based on what I could see from a distance," Dumbledore said. "I should have looked closer." "You're looking now," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that was unusual on his face, something softer than wisdom, something that had been worn down to something more human. "Yes," he said. "I am." He walked away down the street, and by the time he reached the corner he had simply stopped being there, in the way of a man who was not at all where Privet Drive could contain him. Harry stood at the gate and watched the empty corner for a moment. Then he went back inside. He was in the shed reading Brightwater by 8 o'clock, lamp angled over his notes, Hedwig on her perch pulling at a loose feather with the focused attention of an owl who had decided that grooming was the appropriate response to the day's events. The house felt different. It was hard to describe, but he could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before rain, not in one place but generally, the ambient quality of the space he was in. The house had been, since his first day back, a held breath. Now something had released. He heard the Dursleys inside. Vernon's television at a normal volume. Dudley's laugh at something. Petunia washing up. The sounds of a family evening operating at something approaching its own natural register. He was halfway through a paragraph about Brightwater's third category of ambient magic. She called it spatial resonance, the relationship between a magic user and the physical space they inhabited, the way long-term magical presence changed the behavior of a building at a molecular level, when he heard the back door open. "Dudley." The two-knuckle knock. "Come in," Harry said. Dudley came in and sat on the bucket with the slightly increased confidence of someone who'd been doing it regularly enough that it no longer required the careful assessment phase. "He came, then," Dudley said. "Dumbledore." "Yeah. What's he like?" Dudley said. Harry thought about it. "Like someone who knows more than he says," he said. "But who's been deciding whether to say it, and is starting to say more of it." Dudley considered this. "Dad's in there watching telly." "I know. I heard. He doesn't usually watch telly on Wednesdays. He's usually doing the expense reports." "First time for everything," Harry said. Dudley looked at the Brightwater book. "What are you reading?" "A book about how magic works without a wand. Written by a witch. 1891, Ada Lind Brightwater." 1891, Dudley said. He looked at the cover. He said, with the complete flatness of someone not sure how to inflect it, "That's old." "It's interesting," Harry said. "She wrote that magic at a high enough level doesn't need the wand because it's part of the person rather than a tool the person uses." Dudley chewed on this for a moment. "Like, it's you." "That's the idea, yeah. So all the stuff with the furniture is me, yes. In the sense that it reflects what I am rather than what I decide." Dudley looked at the wall of the shed, which was also the wall of the garden, which was adjacent to the kitchen where the furniture had been doing its thing for 3 weeks. "That's a bit mad," he said, with genuine appreciation rather than judgment. "It really is," Harry agreed. "Cool, though," Dudley said. "Extremely," said Harry. The next morning, at breakfast, Vernon passed Harry the butter. Not prompted, not as a result of a request, Harry reached toward it and Vernon, sitting across from him, was closer, and he picked it up and passed it. Harry took it. Said, "Cheers." Vernon said, and went back to his paper. Petunia, at the counter, made no comment. Dudley was 3 bites into his cereal and didn't look up. It was entirely ordinary. It was the most ordinary thing that had ever happened at this table, and ordinarily was what Harry had been asking for from the beginning, just that, just the basic, unremarkable exchange of the butter, and he spread it on his toast and ate breakfast and the morning proceeded. The house was quiet around them, not the pressurized silence of something holding itself in check but the actual, genuine quiet of a space that had said its piece and was now resting. The armchair was in its corner. The table was in its center. The salt shaker was by the pepper grinder where it belonged. Harry ate his toast and thought about September, about King's Cross, about the train, about the castle on the hill above the lake in the morning. He thought about Ron and Hermione and the castle and the lessons and all of it, the whole enormous machinery of the world he actually lived in. He thought, 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and then it would be September, and this summer would be whatever it was, a turning point, an argument won, a thing that had changed, a house that had briefly, magnificently, decided who it was on the side of. 6 weeks was nothing. The incident happened that afternoon, which meant it happened before Harry had time to feel comfortable. He was inside, getting a glass of water, when he heard it from upstairs, a door and then raised voices, Vernon and Petunia, which was unusual because they didn't argue, not loudly, not where they could be heard. He stood in the kitchen and listened and got, through the ceiling, the shape of it, Vernon, tight and controlled, and Petunia, which was when Harry realized it wasn't an argument, it was an agreement, and Vernon was having it with himself while Petunia watched. The words came clearly through the kitchen ceiling, take it back. The whole summer. Everything we've agreed. I want it back the way it was. And Petunia, quiet, it won't go back, Vernon. If we just, it won't, she said. Look at him. It won't. Silence. Long, he's going to be, Vernon stopped. Yes, Petunia said. He is. Another silence. I don't know how to, Petunia, I don't know how to have someone like that in this house and just, make him sandwiches, Petunia said. Pass him the butter. Look at him when he talks. That's all. That's the whole of it. Harry stood in the kitchen with his glass of water. He heard Vernon make a sound that had no category, not quite a sigh, not quite anything, the sound of a man revising something fundamental and finding the revision physically uncomfortable. All right, Vernon said. All right. Harry went back to the shed. He sat at the desk and looked at his books and did not feel triumphant, particularly, because this wasn't triumph. It wasn't a defeat of Vernon Dursley or a victory for Harry Potter. It was something more like a landslide, the slow movement of something that had always been going to move, once enough small things shifted underneath it. He picked up his quill. Dear Ron, he wrote. I think you can tell your mum yes to the visit. Last 2 weeks of August. Tell her I'll explain everything when I get there. He sent it with Hedwig and then sat in the shed and listened to the house settle around him, the particular sounds of its wooden frame and plaster walls and the furniture that had taken a position 3 weeks ago and held it faithfully and was now, in the quiet of a Wednesday afternoon, simply a house going about its business. He was home, and it wasn't home, and both of those things were true at once, and he was 12 years old and powerful in ways that he was only beginning to understand, and outside the late afternoon light was coming through the shed window at an angle that turned his notes gold. He opened the ambient witch to Chapter 9. He read until dinner. Chapter 5, Platform 9 3/4. The last week of July arrived and Harry woke up 12 years old. He knew it was his birthday before he was fully awake, not from any external signal, just the way the morning felt different, the way days sometimes announced themselves before you'd done anything to deserve them. He lay on his back in Dudley's second bedroom and looked at the ceiling and thought, 12. Hedwig was already awake on her perch, watching him with the amber patience of someone who'd been waiting for him to catch up. I know, he said. She hooted. He got dressed and went down to the shed, not to avoid the Dursleys, which would have been the old reason, but because he preferred it, the oil and sun smell of it, the desk with his books laid out in the specific order he'd developed over the summer, the window angled toward the garden. He'd stopped thinking of the shed as a retreat from the house and started thinking of it as his space within the house, which was a distinction that mattered more than it might have sounded. He had letters on the desk from yesterday, from Ron, from Hermione, from Hagrid, from the Weasley twins collectively, from Neville in his careful uncertain handwriting, from a girl in his astronomy class named Yolanda who he'd spoken to 3 times and was apparently now his friend without his having been consulted on the matter. He read through them in order, Hedwig walking along his shoulder, the morning doing its slow warming up outside the window. Ron said, Happy birthday mate. Mum's made a cake, she'll send it with Errol, sorry in advance about Errol's landing, it's been an issue lately. 2.5 weeks. Fred and George are building something in the attic and I'm not allowed to know what, which means it's either brilliant or dangerous, probably both. Hermione said, "Happy birthday, Harry." I found a reference to Brightwater in another source, Celestine Waugh's 1923 essay on magical inheritance. She describes someone she calls the Godric's Hollow Case, without naming names, and Harry I think she might be writing about. Well, I'll show you in September. Have a good day. Harry read that one twice. Hagrid said, "Harry, happy birthday. Hope the Muggles are being decent. Fawn sends his regards. I've been keepin' busy with a project but I'll tell ya about it in September. Eat something good today." He put the letters in the careful stack he'd been keeping, all his summer correspondence, growing fat and significant on the corner of the desk. He'd shown Ron's letters to Dudley once, on a whim, and Dudley had read them with the focused interest of someone consuming a story from a country they'd never been to. "He sounds funny," Dudley had said, about Ron. "He does a lot of exclamation marks." "He means them all," Harry had said. He was halfway through the twins' letter, which was mostly creative speculation about what he was getting up to and required reading in the same spirit as one reads fiction, when the shed door opened and Petunia came in. She was carrying a plate. On the plate was a piece of cake. Not a cupcake, not something half-hearted, an actual slice of cake, chocolate, from the look of it, on one of the good plates with a fork laid beside it. She set it on the corner of the desk that wasn't occupied by letters, and stood back, and looked at the window. "Happy birthday," she said. Harry looked at the cake. Then at Petunia. "Thank you," he said. She stood for another moment, in the way she sometimes stood when she'd done something that required more of herself than she'd planned and was recalibrating. Then she said, "She used to make cake. Lily. She was good at it." She paused. "I'm passable." "It looks excellent," Harry said. Petunia looked at him. "Don't overdo it," she said, and went back inside. Harry ate the cake at his desk with the fork she'd brought and thought about Lily making cake and about Petunia watching, the two of them in some kitchen 25 years ago, the sister who could and the sister who couldn't, and the complicated, lifelong, unresolved thing between them that had somehow ended up depositing Harry here, in this shed, eating birthday cake on a Tuesday morning. The cake was actually very good. 3 days later he found the letters. He'd half forgotten about them, or rather, he'd been trying not to think about them directly, the way you avoid looking at something that matters too much, because looking at it too directly might change it from possible to real and then to gone. They were in a shoebox. Petunia brought it to the shed on a Thursday afternoon without warning, just knocked, came in, set it on the desk. "There are 12 of them," she said. "From the last year. Before, she didn't finish. I kept them. I don't know why I kept them, I did." She left. Harry opened the shoebox and sat very still for a moment. 12 envelopes. Lily Potter's handwriting on each one, he'd seen it before, in Hagrid's photo album, on the back of a photograph, James, Harry, and me, October 1981. He recognized the loops of it, the particular slant. He took the first envelope out. He didn't read them all at once. He read 2, put the box under the desk, went for a walk around the garden, came back, read 1 more, went upstairs and lay on his bed and looked at the ceiling for a while. The letters they were Lily, in the daily, specific, unrepeatable way that letters hold people. She wrote about hiding. About being bored. About James burning toast and making her laugh about it. About Harry, who was 8 months old and had apparently discovered his feet and was treating this as a major philosophical development. "He does this thing," she wrote, "where he stares at his hands. Just stares at them. James says he's contemplating the nature of existence, but I think he's just working out the hand-to-mouth coordination. Either way, it's the best thing I've ever seen. I wish you could see it, Toonie. I wish you could see it, Toonie." Harry held the letter for a while. He didn't cry, exactly, or maybe he did, a bit, in the brief and private way of someone who allows it for a moment and then folds it back up because there are other things to do with the rest of the day. He put the letter carefully back in its envelope and put it in the box and put the box under the desk. He went to find Petunia. She was in the kitchen. She heard him come in and didn't turn from the counter. She said she wished you could see it, Harry said. In one of the letters. About me figuring out my hands. Petunia's hands on the counter went still. She wrote I wish you could see it, Toonie, Harry said. A long moment. She was always, Petunia stopped. She was always saying things like that. Things that made it harder. She turned around, and her face was doing the controlled rapid thing it did when she was managing something significant. I couldn't. I couldn't be part of it. Any of it. And she kept writing and I didn't write back, and by the time it might have been different, she stopped. Harry looked at her. He thought about 12 letters in a shoebox. 25 years of a not-written response. She knew, Harry said. Whatever you didn't write. She knew. Petunia made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She kept writing, Harry said. She wrote 12 letters and you didn't write back, and she kept writing. She knew. Petunia turned back to the counter. After a moment she said, very quietly, he has her laugh. I heard you laughing at something Ron wrote, the other day, and it's her laugh. Harry stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he went back to the shed. He read 2 more letters. The Weasleys came on the 15th of August. Harry heard the car before he saw it, an old Ford Anglia that announced itself with the confident unreliability of a vehicle that had survived this long through stubbornness rather than maintenance. It pulled up in front of Number 4 and the Weasley family decanted from it in a way that suggested the inside was considerably larger than the outside, which given the family he was dealing with was probably literally true. Ron came out first, red hair impossible in the morning sun, grinning the grin of someone for whom everything is basically fine and that's excellent. Behind him came Fred and George, who came as a unit and surveyed the exterior of Number 4 with the professional interest of people assessing a site. Then Ginny, who Harry had met briefly the previous year and who appeared to have decided during the intervening months to be entirely unbothered by things that had previously been concerning to her. Then Arthur Weasley, who was looking at the house with an expression of joyful scientific fascination. Harry. Ron grabbed his arm. You look different. Good different or bad different? Harry said. Ron looked at him. Taller, maybe. And less, you usually look a bit, beaten down. George offered helpfully from behind Ron. I was going to say tired, Ron said. I wasn't going to say anything, Fred said, because I have manners. Unlike George. You were absolutely going to say something, George said. Harry, said Mr. Weasley, coming forward with the enthusiasm of a man who had been looking forward to this moment since he heard about it. He shook Harry's hand with both of his. This is extraordinary. I've been reading everything I can find about spontaneous ambient. Well, Molly says I shouldn't interrogate you the moment I arrive, so I'll hold my questions. But I have questions. I have answers, Harry said. Mr. Weasley looked delighted. Excellent. Molly Weasley came last, organizing the exit from the car in the way she organized most things, comprehensively, with specific instructions for each person and an expression of warm, non-negotiable authority. She looked at Harry when he came out to the gate, really looked at him, the way mothers look when they're assessing something that matters. You're all right, she said. Not a question. Better than all right, Harry said. She hugged him anyway, which was thorough and unambiguous and smelled like the burrow, wood smoke and something baking and the particular scent of a house that was genuinely lived in. Harry hugged back and thought, 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks before September 1st. He intended to make them excellent. The Weasley arrival at Number 4 had a specific effect on the atmosphere of the house, which Harry hadn't fully anticipated but which made perfect sense in retrospect. The Dursleys were outnumbered. Not in a hostile way, the Weasleys were too naturally cheerful for hostility, it wasn't in their register, but numerically, volumetrically. They filled the sitting room and spilled into the kitchen, and Arthur Weasley asked Vernon questions about the drills with an interest so genuine and intense that Vernon found himself, despite everything, explaining the differential torque mechanism of a specific model, while Arthur nodded along with the expression of a man discovering a new form of magic. "Fascinating," Arthur said. "And it goes through the material?" "Just, straight through." "With the right bit, yes," Vernon said. "Remarkable," Arthur breathed. "And it's entirely Muggle-powered?" "No, nothing else involved." "Electricity," Vernon said. Of course," Arthur said, in the tone of someone for whom electricity was still a wonder. Vernon looked slightly dazed. Harry, watching from the doorway with Ron, suspected nobody had ever been that enthusiastic about drills in Vernon's presence without wanting something. "Your dad," Harry said. "I know," Ron said fondly. "He does this to everyone." Molly had taken over the kitchen with Petunia in the specific way of two organized women in a shared space, a brief negotiation of territory that resolved itself into Molly making tea and Petunia producing biscuits, and both of them operating in the kitchen simultaneously without collision, discussing the garden in tones that suggested they'd been doing this for years. Ginny was in the sitting room with Dudley, which Harry had expected to be awkward but which appeared, from the sounds coming through the door, to be developing into a conversation about Dudley's collection of video games, about which Ginny was asking questions in exactly Arthur's mode, fascinated, comprehensive, entirely without judgment. "She does that too," Ron said, watching through the door. "Gets interested in everything." "Good quality," Harry said. The twins were in the garden, which Harry had decided not to examine too closely. That evening, after dinner, which Molly had produced with the casual mastery of someone cooking for 7 additional people being absolutely routine, Harry and Ron sat in the shed with the lamp on and the window open, the evening cooling around them. Ron had been building to something all day. Harry could feel it, that particular Ron quality of having something he wanted to say and approaching it by degrees, conversation circling the point until the moment when it could land. "The thing with the furniture," Ron said. "Yeah," Harry said. "Fred and George want to, they won't say anything stupid, but they want to know if it's okay to see it. The Wandless stuff." Harry looked at his hands. He thought about 3 weeks ago, the pencil, the quill, the padlock. He thought about where he was now, the range, the precision, the ease of it. "Sure," he said. "Now." Harry looked around the shed. He looked at the pencil on the desk. He looked at the stack of Brightwater on the corner, the 3 volumes including the suppressed one that Dumbledore had sent, which had arrived wrapped in brown paper with a note that said only, Chapter 11. AD. He picked up the pencil with his mind. Not metaphorically, he picked it up. It lifted from the desk and floated at about eye level, turning slowly, and then drifted to Ron's hand and stopped. Ron looked at the pencil sitting in his palm. "Okay," he said. "That's the easy one," Harry said. He looked at the Brightwater books. The stack lifted. The 3 volumes sorted themselves into alphabetical order by publication date, which they were already in, so they resettled immediately, and then descended back to the desk. "Harry," Ron said. "I know." "No, Harry, you did that with no wand, no incantation, nothing, yeah. My dad is going to," Ron stopped. "My dad is going to have about 40 questions." "I know. He can ask them." Ron looked at him with the particular expression he used for things he didn't have the vocabulary for yet, open, genuine, trying to find the right frame. "Is it weird," he said, "that it just does what you want?" Harry thought about this honestly. "No," he said. It used to feel like something separate from me, when it was accidental. Like something that happened to me. Now it feels like, it's part of how I think. Like it's just the vocabulary my body uses for deciding things." Ron was quiet for a moment. "And the furniture?" "The furniture uses the same vocabulary," Harry said. "Just for the house." Ron looked at the shed walls. "Is the shed, does the shed do that? Harry looked at the shed. Moderately, he said. The padlock has opinions. The window cooperates. The window cooperates, Ron repeated, like he was logging this. It's been a strange summer, Harry said. Ron laughed, a real one, the kind that started somewhere deep and came out with his whole face. Mate, I know you said in your letters that things were fine, but this is so much more than fine. This is absolutely, this is mental, this is brilliant, it's fine, Harry said, smiling. It really is fine. Ron shook his head. You know, at school, he said, when you went after Quirrell, yeah. Everyone already thought you were, like, even then, first year, people looked at you a certain way. Not the celebrity thing, different from that. Like there was, something. He gestured vaguely. And now I'm sitting here watching you levitate books with your brain and I think, right, that was what they were feeling. Harry looked at him. Does it bother you? He said. Ron looked surprised. Why would it bother me? Because it's a lot. I know it's a lot. Harry, Ron said. You're my best mate and you can move furniture with your feelings. This is the best possible version of you. He paused. Also it means when we play chess and I beat you it's because I'm genuinely better, because if you could cheat with magic you obviously would. I absolutely would, Harry agreed. They stayed in the shed until Molly called them in, talking about Hogwarts, about second year, about everything that was coming. 2 days later Arthur Weasley asked his questions. They sat in the garden, Harry, Mr. Weasley, and surprisingly Petunia, who'd come out to do something in the flower bed and had not, apparently, decided to go back inside when the conversation started. Arthur had a small notebook, which he occasionally wrote things in with an excitement that made the notebook seem more like a journal of discoveries than anything else. Brightwater, Arthur said. You've read all 3 books. The third one twice, Harry said. It's the best. Arthur looked at Petunia. Do you know about Brightwater? He told me, Petunia said, not looking up from the begonias. Last month. Remarkable woman, Arthur said. The ministry suppressed her 3rd book, did you know? 1903, they called it, Dangerous Speculation, Harry said. She was arguing that native magic users couldn't be regulated through wand licensing. Arthur looked at Harry with an expression of profound professional satisfaction. You know, there are people in the ministry, not many, but some, who've been trying to get that book re-released for 30 years. It makes certain people extremely uncomfortable. Because they can't take the wand away, Harry said. Because they can't take the wand away, Arthur agreed. He made a note. The range. You said in the shed the other night, what did Ron say you said? 20 feet precisely, 40 roughly. That was 3 weeks ago, Harry said. It's further now. Arthur looked up. How much further? Harry looked at the shed at the end of the garden, approximately 40 feet away. He looked at the padlock on the shed door. He thought, open. The padlock clicked open. Arthur turned around. Turned back. Made 3 rapid notes. And that's, you're not concentrating particularly hard. About as much as I'd concentrate on tying a shoelace, Harry said. Arthur sat back in his garden chair with the expression of a man whose afternoon had exceeded expectations significantly. Harry, he said. Can I ask you something that isn't about the mechanics of it? Sure. Does it feel like power to you? In the way power feels. The wanting to use it feeling. Harry thought about this carefully, because it was a real question and deserved a real answer. No, he said. It feels like, you know, when something that's been uncomfortable becomes comfortable. Like when you stop being cold, or you stop being hungry. It feels like the not uncomfortable version of something. He paused. I don't want to use it. I just do. Arthur looked at him for a long moment. Then he wrote something in his notebook and underlined it. Petunia, without looking up from the begonias, said, "Lily used to say the same thing about magic. That it wasn't separate from her, it was just how she was. Like being right-handed." Both Harry and Arthur looked at her. She didn't elaborate. She moved to the next flower bed. "She was there when it all happened," Arthur said quietly, to Harry. "Petunia. She was there when Lily found out she was a witch." "I know," Harry said. It must have been an extraordinary thing. For both of them." "I think so," Harry said. The night before September 1st, Harry packed. He did it properly this time, not the frantic shoving of last year, hauling a trunk he barely understood how to manage, trying to fit a year's worth of books into a space that seemed to resist the project. He packed methodically, the way you pack when you know what you're doing: books first, clothes next, school supplies in the side compartment. Hedwig's cage collapsed and strapped to the top. The Weasleys were staying the night, crammed cheerfully into various spaces. The twins had ended up in sleeping bags in the garden, which they'd claimed was their preference and which Harry suspected was true. Ron was on a camp bed in Harry's room, asleep already, his breaths the slow rhythm of someone without anxiety about tomorrow. Harry sat on the edge of his bed after the packing was done and looked around the room. Dudley's second bedroom. The smallest room except the cupboard. The wallpaper was a pattern of steam engines that he'd been looking at since he was 11 and had never bothered to decide how he felt about it. The desk where he'd worked through all those years of hiding homework. The window where Hedwig came in. He'd spent 12 years in this house, and the last 3 months of it had been something so different from everything before that he could draw an exact line in his memory: the drive from King's Cross, Vernon's knuckles on the steering wheel, the specific silence. Everything before the line and everything after it. He heard a knock on the door, not Ron, who was asleep, but from the hallway. 2 quick, polite knocks. "Come in," he said quietly. The door opened. Petunia. She looked at the packed trunk, at Ron asleep on the camp bed, at Harry on the edge of his. She was holding something, a small flat parcel, wrapped in tissue paper. "I thought you should have something to take," she said. He took the parcel. It was lighter than it looked. He opened it. A photograph. Not a moving one, a Muggle photograph, the kind that stays still, but large and clear and well kept. Lily and Petunia as teenagers, probably 16 and 14. They were in a garden Harry didn't recognize, not Privet Drive, somewhere greener, less ordered. Lily was laughing at something off camera. Petunia was looking at Lily with an expression that was the uncomplicated, prehistory version of every complicated thing her face had learned to do since. She looked at Lily the way you look at someone you love. Harry held the photograph and didn't say anything for a moment. "She'd have wanted you to have something of her that was just, ordinary," Petunia said. She was looking at the wall, not the photograph. Not the hero thing, not the war. Just her. "It's perfect," Harry said. Petunia nodded once, brisk, the motion of someone concluding a thing before they feel it too much. She turned to go. "Petunia," Harry said. She stopped. "The letters," he said. "I'm going to write back. From school. On her behalf, I mean, sort of." He paused. If that's okay." She stood in the doorway with her back to him for a moment. "All right," she said. "That would be, all right." She went. Harry put the photograph carefully in the side compartment of his trunk where it wouldn't get bent. He got into bed and lay in the dark and listened to Ron sleeping and thought about tomorrow, and about King's Cross, and about the barrier at platform 9 3/4, and the train. He fell asleep fast and didn't dream about anything. The morning was brilliant chaos. It started at 6 when the twins apparently decided that the optimal time to discover what they'd been building in the garden was right now, and proceeded through a sequence of events that involved a moderate explosion, Arthur Weasley shouting something that sounded more like delight than alarm, Molly's voice carrying from inside the house with the carrying power of a foghorn, and Dudley appearing at his window in his pajamas with his mouth open. Harry stood in the garden eating toast and watched the twins recover something that was either a prototype firework or an extremely confident paper airplane, and he was grinning before he'd fully decided to. "Right," Ron said, appearing beside him. "We should probably, yeah," Harry said. They got the trunk downstairs with the practiced ease of people who'd done harder things, and loaded it into the Ford Anglia, which received it with the dignified suspension adjustment of a car that had seen more interesting cargo. Hedwig was last. Harry carried her cage out and she looked at the assembled Weasley family in the drive with an expression that managed to be simultaneously regal and fond. Vernon came out at 7:30. He stood on the front step in his dressing gown and looked at the loaded car, at the Weasleys, at Harry. "Right," he said. "Heading off," Harry said. Vernon looked at him. He'd been doing this more, over the last 2 weeks, actually looking, the full attention thing, as if he was still in the process of updating some internal file. "Second year," Vernon said. "Second year," Harry agreed. Vernon cleared his throat. "Well." He said nothing else for a moment. "Then, don't do well, I suppose." Harry looked at his uncle. "Thanks," he said, and meant it more than he expected to. Vernon nodded once and went back inside, and that was that, the specific, sideways, insufficient but real farewell of two people who'd managed their 3 months and come out the other side of it standing. Petunia was waiting at the door. She'd already said what she had to say the night before, so this was just the practical goodbye. Harry waved, she lifted a hand, precise and small, and that was its own kind of sufficient. Dudley was at the sitting room window. He pointed at Harry. Harry pointed back. Dudley made an expression that was half a grin, complicated by all the things 11-year-old boys don't know how to say yet, and then retreated from the window. Harry got in the car. King's Cross at 9 in the morning was its particular version of controlled pandemonium. Trolleys, families, the specific volume of a large public space full of people, all of whom urgently needed to be somewhere else, pigeons doing their unimpressed surveillance of the concourse. The Weasleys moved through it in formation, Molly at the front, Arthur slightly sideways because he kept looking at things, the twins running interference, Ginny holding Ron's sleeve, Ron pushing his trolley with the specific energy of someone nearly home. Harry pushed his trolley beside Ron and felt the King's Cross feeling, that specific settling, the same feeling he'd had last year walking onto platform 9 3/4 for the first time, like a frequency he was attuned to getting stronger. They went through the barrier in pairs, Fred and George first, then Ginny and Molly, then Arthur, who went through with the expression of a man stepping into Narnia and came out on the other side absolutely vibrating with it. Ron looked at Harry. "Ready?" "Always," Harry said. They went through together. The platform was steam and noise and scarlet. The Hogwarts Express sat at the platform like a very confident statement of intent, every compartment window already showing faces, already showing the particular population of Wizarding Britain's young, robes and owls and pointed hats and trolleys with cauldrons and cats, the whole brilliant, strange, familiar world of it. Harry stopped. He just stood there for a moment, letting it land. He could feel it, not just the platform but the magic in the air of the place, the ambient accumulated magic of 10,000 students over 100 years, the particular resonance of a space that had always known what it was for. He felt it the way he felt things now, with the part of himself that had been learning to pay attention all summer, and it was enormous and warm and entirely right. Harry. Hermione, materializing from the crowd with the focused energy of a small, very intelligent missile. She was wearing summer clothes and carrying a bag so full it appeared structural, and she arrived and looked at him with the expression she'd been preparing since his letter in July. "Tell me everything," she said. "You first," he said. "The Celestine Mois thing." Hermione's eyes lit up. "Okay. So. In the 1923 essay she describes a child from Godric's Hollow. She doesn't name names but she describes the circumstances, exceptionally powerful, orphaned young, raised in a non-magical environment, and she writes that the absence of early magical instruction rather than suppressing the magic actually allowed it to develop in the, what did she call it, the unmediated form. Like it grew without a channel so it grew around everything, integrated into the whole person instead of just the one-directing pathways, Harry said. Exactly. Hermione said. Harry, she's writing about you. Or she's writing about someone who was you, a generation ago, which means this has happened before, which means, she stopped herself, rearranged. It means there might be more to find. Dumbledore sent me Brightwater's third book, Harry said. Hermione made a sound. He has a copy. She said he had a copy, but I wasn't sure if, can I borrow it? I brought it, Harry said, tapping his trunk on the trolley. Hermione looked at him. Ron looked at him. Then they both looked at each other. He brought it, Ron said. I see that, Hermione said. He's been reading it twice and bringing it to Hogwarts. I can hear you, Harry said. Ron clapped him on the shoulder. Mate, you've had the best summer. It wasn't exactly a summer, Harry said. It was more like a negotiation. With your uncle's furniture, Hermione said. And my uncle, Harry said. Mostly the furniture though. The whistle sounded, the long, confident note of the Hogwarts Express telling everyone that it knew what time it was and they should be on it. The platform surged. Compartment doors opened and closed, owls hooted at the movement, a cat on someone's trolley said something comprehensive about all of this. Harry grabbed his trunk. He was halfway to the nearest compartment when he felt something, not heard, felt, the way he felt things now. He stopped and turned around. Mrs. Figg was on the platform. She wasn't supposed to be, she was a squib, not a Hogwarts family, she had no reason to be here, but she was standing near the barrier, half behind a pillar, and she was watching Harry with the expression of someone who'd waited to see something happen and was watching it happen now. Harry looked at her. She lifted one hand. Brief, small, the gesture of someone saying, I see you. Go. Harry turned back to the train. He pulled his trunk up the steps with Ron and Hermione beside him, the steam warm against his face, the familiar corridor smell of the train coming up around him, that combination of wood and magic and decades of journeys all layered into the fabric of the thing. They found a compartment. Neville was already in it, having apparently arrived before anyone else and claimed a corner with his toad Trevor in his lap, and he looked up when they came in with the expression of someone who'd been hoping for specifically these three people. Harry. Neville said. Neville, Harry said. They loaded trunks into racks, put animals in their places, folded themselves into seats. The platform outside the window was still moving, parents waving, students running, the general controlled chaos of departure doing its thing. Hermione already had a book open before they'd sat down, which was less reading and more comfort, the book being a thing her hands needed while her brain processed 11 weeks of summer at high speed. Ron was looking out the window with the satisfied expression of someone returning to a place they love. Neville was telling Trevor that Trevor needed to calm down, which was, Harry thought, somewhat self-defeating advice from Neville, but delivered with genuine warmth. The whistle sounded again. The train moved. Harry watched King's Cross slide past the window and felt the summer moving past with it, the shed, the Brightwater books, the armchair, the dinner table with opinions, Marge on the bucket, the letters in the shoebox, the cake on his birthday, Vernon passing the butter. The whole summer, the negotiation, the furniture that had taken a side. He thought about 12 letters. He thought about I wish you could see it, Toonie. He thought about narrow hands and striking eyes and a laugh that apparently sounded like his. He thought about Dumbledore's word, essence. You cannot misdirect what you are. He looked at his hands. Harry, Hermione said, not looking up from her book, you're doing it again. Doing what? The pencil, Ron said, also without looking away from the window. Harry looked at the pencil on the seat beside him, which was approximately 4 inches off the surface and rotating slowly. He hadn't noticed he'd done it. He let it rest back down. Sorry, he said. Don't be, Hermione said. I'm keeping notes on the unconscious instances. I have 14 from this morning. 14. Harry said. The luggage rack cooperated particularly well, she said, turning a page. Ron finally looked away from the window. He looked at Harry with the straightforward warmth of someone for whom complicated things were actually quite simple when it came to the people he cared about. Second year, Ron said. Second year, Harry said. Outside, London gave way to the outskirts and the outskirts gave way to something greener, wider, more itself, the country opening up around the train as it went north, the sky doing what English skies do in late summer, enormous and layered and full of the particular quality of light that felt like a promise about something, even if you couldn't name what. The Hogwarts Express ran north. Harry settled into his seat, hands in his lap, something entirely settled in his chest, not the settled feeling of someone who'd survived something, though there was that, but the settled feeling of someone who'd found something, who'd reached into the space where they lived and discovered it was larger than they'd been told, and stronger, and entirely, incontrovertibly theirs. The pencil lifted again, just slightly. He let it.